You're watching WisconsinEye, an independent, nonprofit public affairs network, engaging the citizens of Wisconsin since 2007 through access to government proceedings and public policy events.
Kids would do that. That's awesome. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I am Barb Lemieux, President and CEO of the New North, and we are welcoming you here to our Broadband Accelerator this morning. We have convened a really dynamic group of panelists throughout the day. I first want to acknowledge that this would not have happened without Jim Wood coming to us with Wood Communications Group and talking about events that they're doing all around the state that does a deeper dive into the obstacles that we all face with regard to talent attraction, talent retention, and obviously we want to continue to grow our business community in the state of Wisconsin. Excuse me. So we thank Jim and team very much for putting this on. I have Mark always on speed dial, so he was an easy yes and said we know all of you as counties are looking at the development of broadband county plans, so it was a natural to have Mark be on the panel as well. And then our colleague, Brittany Byard with Grow North and on the Governor's Commission on Broadband. So we really wanted that regional perspective as well. So how did we all get here and what is it that we want to accomplish today? I know our next panel is going to do a deeper dive into the New North journey into broadband, which has led to each of our 18 counties having their own implementation plans and looking at what we need to do to solve it. So I think we're beyond studying the problem. It's now let's just get it fixed, right? So you will also hear today we have broadband is not going to work without the triad, and that triad is our internet service providers, and we have many in the room, and we thank you all for your investment. We are also broadcasting this virtually, so we have many more that are joining us that way, and we have good broadband in the building that we can make that happen. But again, we thank our internet service providers for their continued investment in our region and across Wisconsin. The second leg of that stool is really local government, and at the state level, the federal level, and local government. We're really pleased today to have Kara Cook here with NTIA, and we are going to do a deep dive into the panel with the Public Service Commission on the various funding opportunities that are available so we all understand it. And we can figure out how we develop a strategy that we can tap into those federal resources. And then I also mentioned the Public Service Commission is very much going to be part of today's panel. And that third leg of that stool is really economic development professionals. It's our local partners. We're very proud of the collaboration we have here in Northeast Wisconsin in particular, and many of our local partners are sitting in the room. They're closest to the issue, so they're hearing from their business communities and from residents about issues that they have concerning broadband and coming up with creative solutions as to how we get that fixed. So thank you all for being here. I am going to turn it over now to Brittany for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Barb. And thank you for putting this together again with Jim. As Barb said, I'm the Executive Director of Grow North Regional Economic Development Corporation, so the first hat I have been wearing is economic development. But I, for the past 2 years, served as the chair and am now outgoing from the task force on broadband for the state of Wisconsin. And I just wanted to make sure that, I think a little perspective is needed. Wisconsin actually has a lot of the resources put in place compared to some of the other states. We've had an Office of Broadband for a number of years. We've had great investment in grants from the states where other states haven't been doing that. And the task force has stood up during COVID, but the work started previous to COVID, knowing that broadband was such a needed issue. And so as we're all working together on this issue, we have a great base to be working from. But the real work is still ahead, and it's the conversations that haven't been put together yet, the unusual people who could be at the table who are not there yet, that all need to be invited because it's going to be part of the solution making. And I know that we're all looking at this moment as this unprecedented investment in broadband, and it really will take the federal dollars traveling all the way down to the local level with local preparedness, local partnerships between those providers, between municipalities, and those organizations that are going to be really important for making sure that the projects move forward. It's going to be really important for all of us to work together. So the continual interest from the public and the size of the conversations on this really encourages me, because I know that people are aware of the need. And I really thank you for all of the time that you put towards this individually as we try to find the solutions for everyone in the state.
Great. Thank you, Brittany.
Great. Thanks, Brittany. Thanks, Barb. I'm Mark O'Connell, President and CEO of the Wisconsin Counties Association. I would say I'm, first of all, incredibly happy to be on Barb's speed dial. At any time when, as many of you know, when Barb asks, you just say yes, and then you ask, what is it? And that is the case here as well. An event like this can only occur with the help of partners and sponsors. And so we are so incredibly grateful to New North, and Barb, you and your entire team for helping make this happen. Of course, we have sponsors of this event, American Family Insurance, Wood Communications Group, and the Wisconsin Counties Association. I've often talked about the need for a successful, vibrant private sector in this state. And when we look at what it is the private sector needs to be successful, it's a long list. But when you look at the top of the list, it is smart young talent, a lot of brain power, the new wealth makers of tomorrow. It is available capital to grow, to expand, to risk. But most importantly, an infrastructure, the hard infrastructure like our surface streets and our harbors, but our soft infrastructure, which is really going to position us to be successful in a new millennium knowledge technology-based economy. And what does that mean? Well, in short words, broadband. How do we get it? How do we get it everywhere? And how do we get the high speed? And how do we connect all of us so that we are positioned to succeed in Wisconsin and make our economy all that it can be? That is part of what we're going to talk about today. Are there going to be is there going to be a list of absolute, this is what we need to do to be successful by the end of the day? Maybe. But are we going to more likely take major steps toward, I think I can see the end of the tunnel. I see some light. And it's going to take a lot of us working together, holding hands, maybe holding hands with folks we didn't normally hold hands with in the past, but holding hands to walk toward this successful state. What I would suggest to you is that broadband is necessary as we play the long game, not the short game of who's going to win today at the expense of someone else, but how do we play the long game so our entire state is positioned for success, every part of it, and broadband's a big part of that. So welcome to everyone here at Fox Valley. Welcome to our 100-plus people who have, I think zoomed in or teamed in. I think it's zoomed in today. And very much thank you to New North. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, let us begin. Let's bring up, come on up here and grab one of these microphones, Mr. Peter Thillman, Chief Economic Development Officer of Shawano County Economic Progress, Barbara Koldis, Vice President of Business Development for New North, and Jack Madam, Senior Broadband Analyst with Design 9. Grab one of these microphones and... Okay. All right. So, and what I would, Peter and Barbara, make sure you talk right into the microphone so we can pick up everything and everyone can hear. You got to go real close to it, just like you're on Star Search, right into the microphone.
What is Star Search?
I will channel my inner karaoke.
That's your inner karaoke, and Star Search. Is Star Search even on anymore? I mean, that was my generation. What is it today? What are these?
Is it Americans Got Talent?
That's it, yeah, like that. So speak right into the microphone. I understand Jack is going to join us via Zoom, and we all have slides. So, Peter, I think you're going to start off. So we're going to talk about the New North experience, and you're going to show us a picture show, I guess.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the slides to come up. this is an interesting experience that we went through. I was hired, and my first day of work in Channel County was March 10th, 2020. So I spent 1 week in the office, and the next week the state shut down. So we had some issues, people needing to work from home, people needing to learn from home, people needing to get medical from home also. And I found out quickly that the maps said that we had service throughout the whole county, but the maps were not accurate. And at that point, I contacted, it was Connie Loden at the time, and New North, because Shawano County had not really the ability or the expertise to go through the process of mapping where we needed to get service to our people. And through this group, we ended up getting a quick task force arranged throughout northeast Wisconsin, working together with the RPCs and with a number of the other players in the region. And as you can see, a lot of it is rural. So we have some rural aspects to the access. And we started working, and you can flip it to the next one. Everyone had problems, but the biggest problem was that how do we pay for it? And New North took a lead and applied with, and we received an EDA grant. And this is the core group that worked on it. And if you look at the previous slide, we had a little bit of assistance because one of the core members of the first group was Tom Barron, who happened to be with East Central Regional Plan Commission, but miraculously, in the middle of 2020, was hired by the EDA, so he became an advocate for the grant, which helped. We received the grant, and it clearly became evident as we're going through the process that the people on the committee, some are more gifted, like August, on broadband. I am clueless. I mean, it's kind of like electricity. Flip the switch, turn it on, it works, right? If it doesn't, you call your electrician. But we knew that we needed to get service to everyone in our communities to be successful. But we didn't know where we needed to spend the money. And I thought it was always crazy that the state was spending money just providing service, not determining who needed it, multiple layers of service. So this group came together, and thankfully with Broadband Barbara here, we were able to start implementing this study to figure out what are the recommendations that are going to provide service throughout 18 counties. Speed tests, many focus groups. And it comes evident, you're going to find throughout the day that there are two issues that we're finding. First, you have access, and then you're going to have affordability issues too. So, I mean, we have to address both of these because broadband is, the electrification of America after the Depression. It is a necessary service that we need and to be successful. You can go to the next slide. You can go to the next one too. So here's what happened. We received this, in the first ARPA maximization type stuff. We saw the funding opportunity. We got a group together. I think the most critical thing was the community foundation stepping up and helping to match, because there was a match requirement for this grant, and we're appreciative of that match. And at the end of the day, they submitted the grant in September. We got it, and we got the study. And with that, I'd turn it over to Broadband Barbara for her.
That's been my nickname up until now. If you can flip over to the next slide. Thanks, Kenan. So just a quick overview. My name is Barbara Koldos, and I'm Vice President of Business Development. My role at New North is really about business attraction, site selection, helping companies who are interested in our region. So the joke is I knew nothing about broadband, so now I am Broadband Barbara, because when I came to New North, we needed someone to kind of be the project manager for our EDA grant, and Barbara was assigned the role. So I still don't know anything about broadband. I know the process in which we went through. So I am, just like Peter, we know just enough to be able to talk about it. But don't ask us about the technical stuff. I leave that to August. Thanks, August. But first, I wanted to say thank you so much to our local partners, ISPs, WISPs, county execs. county administrators and leaders, anyone who has been a part of any roundtables, phone calls, any of the meetings that we've had up until this point. You'll see in later slides, we had over 72 meetings with each of our 18 counties over the course of 3 months. And that is not an easy lift to do. So we really appreciate everyone's time and efforts and contributions to the overall reports. Really, we received notification in May of 2021 that we received a $500,000 grant from the EDA, which was matched $125,000 by community foundations, local community foundations out of Gaming County, and then, of course, New North contributed as well. We initiated the project in September of 2021, but that was after an RFQ process where we received 6 submissions of RFQs, and as you saw, the core stakeholder team, those individuals were the ones who then reviewed those submissions, and we selected to work with Design9, MSA, and we partnered them up with GeoPartners to do the speed testing. The study, as part of this, they did a survey, so it was kind of a 2-prong approach. One was we released a physical study, a survey to every household in the New North region, and we received about 17,000 responses. We also, as part of that survey, we also did a speed test, which is still on, and we also did some asset mapping as well. This is where Design9 looked at all of the current towers that were existing, where all the fiber lines. So these individual studies were being done concurrently within a 3-month period, which is really, really fast from what I'm learning. The study was complete in December. We released the New North Regional Plan in February, and then we released individually to each counties from February to April, and then the final reports were completed in May of 2022. So some engagement pieces that we did, this is the speed tests that we did. As you can see, it kind of evolved from September 30th, October 5th. These is just the snapshots of the speed tests that were conducted. It was actually started by Brown County doing their speed tests. We then adopted it for an 18-county region, which was then adopted by the entire 72 counties of the state of Wisconsin. As you can see, over 20,000 tests were completed through July 14th. It is still on, and so there's a QR code here. I believe these slides will also be available, so we welcome you to continue doing the speed tests, because more accurate speed tests that we have is the data that we need for the grants that we're applying for. And my understanding of speed tests and why this is so important as an individual piece is because in previous mapping efforts, it was all done by census tracts. And I know there are others in the rooms who are more technical than myself, so if there's anything I'm saying incorrectly, I apologize ahead of time. My understanding is that it's done by census tracts, so Peter and I can live right across the street from each other. He can do a speed test, I'll do a speed test. If he has good connection at that moment in time, and they take his address as the speed test for our census tract, it may not measure what I'm getting right across the street. So the benefit of this speed test that we conducted was just to then be more individualized, as well as based on what activity and what time of day that it's occurring. So it could be just while I'm working throughout the day, or it could be at night when my entire family's streaming on their computers and on their devices. Next, please. Thank you. So I think this is one of the more important pieces of what our plan really did was, I know in the governor's task force, broadband task force report, one of the key initiatives is to make sure that there's community building and networking. And I believe that what we did as a New North region really exemplifies what is possible. We conducted meetings with each of our 18 counties individually, at least three in person or online, really took in all the data, all the information, all the comments that they had. We had speed tests done, surveys done. We convened 2 meetings, one with county executives, administrators, and board leaders, as well as a second one that also included ISPs, supposed to be WISPs, I apologize, and the PSCs, as well as other stakeholders. And this is evident by, we saw that the PSC awarded nearly $9 million and $25 million in matched grants to 12 awardees in June of 2022. Thank you so much to PSC for those grants. And those grants were awarded to 11 of the 18 counties in the New North region. So it's just kind of we look at it like a storyline or building block. We built this, and people have used it to this point, and there's been some dollars that have now hit our region. Next slide. All right. Jack, are you online?
Yes, I'm online now.
Oh, the voice. Hi, Jack.
Hi, Barbara. Hi, Broadband Barbara.
That name's going to stick. So I have these two slides up for you. One is the recommendations, and the other one is the maps of what your recommendation was.
Sure. Thank you. Peter, I guess you're going to need a handle as well. I propose Peter Pop for a point of presence. In broadband circles, I typically go by Jumper Jack Flash, but just Jack will do. But anyway, thank you for the invitation. And Barbara and I have toured the counties, all 18 pretty much, often physically in person, but also all of them virtually as well. And we were able to make connections that worked out very well. It was during the winter, and I know that a number of our meetings were canceled, at least in physical terms, but again, it shows the value of virtual meetings, and we certainly hope to improve that as we go along here. We did develop a regional broadband strategy together with New North, and we decided to come up with a middle mile approach. And you can thank ETCOG for that. ETCOG is the Eastern Texas Council of Governments. And we had been doing for a couple of years at this point, a broadband study for them. And the initial plan from ETCOG was to have each of the 14 counties propose 5 business applications for broadband. And essentially it took us 2 years to finally realize that that wasn't going to happen because the county authorities could not determine who should get broadband and who shouldn't. So we developed the middle mile approach because first of all, it's needed. But secondly, it allows the ETCOG and New North to be able to take advantage of what they do, which is try to marshal the resources from a number of counties, 18 in New North and 14 in ETCOG, and be able to propose solutions that one county could not propose and could not meet. We're still involved in that project, still working with the counties. They're on a different time frame than New North was. So I do applaud both Barb and Barbara for essentially paving the ground for us to be able to meet with all the counties and develop an accelerated plan. And I'm glad to see that 11 of the 18 counties were awarded grants. Design 9 is a small engineering consulting firm in Western Virginia, not West Virginia, in Blacksburg. And we've done over 250 of these studies around the country. And more, they are coming from groups of counties, not just individual counties or cities. We've done multiple county studies in Pennsylvania, Texas, and in Wisconsin, and in fact, we'll be starting another one in Texas, a little further north, of the Arkansas-Texas County of Governments. But in addition, you can read these recommendations that we made. The first thing we say when we go into a county, whether it's an individual county or a group of county, is the county government should not become internet service providers. That's not so much a temptation anymore as it was, or perhaps a perceived necessity as it was a few years ago. We think that the internet service providers and the internet service providers have become aware that, especially in this age of mega funding from the federal government, that they're better off working with the counties and the government, and especially as it applies to rural areas, to be able to take advantage of the money. So we think that this is a golden time for broadband because of advances in technology, also the requirements for funding for high-speed broadband. And so we think that, as you've shown here by getting 11 grants so far, that this could be a great time for rural counties and areas to acquire better broadband. We also think that both wireless and fiber solutions are needed. We do recognize that the funding requirements now, the new funding requirements, are tilted much more towards fiber. We think that ultimately everyone's going to have fiber, but in the meantime, we think that everybody should have access to better broadband that in many cases is wireless. And even if every home does have fiber, wireless is certainly a necessary backup. And we think that for a long time to come, it's going to take quite a while to get fiber out to every community. But just like everybody now has electricity, we think that everybody will have fiber as well in the future. The ordinance and planning changes are important in terms of zoning. For anyone who has installed fiber networks or wireless networks and trying to acquire sites and build along roadways, that can be very time consuming, one of the most time consuming. So we think that improved zoning, we think that big once policies are extremely important. So there certainly is a role for municipal and county governments in broadband, whether that's owning broadband assets or whether that's streamlining process. Both of those have their place and can be important. The ARPA and other grant funds at the moment certainly would appear to be a one-time opportunity because we know that the BEAD program, $42.5 billion, is going to be extending over a number of years for it really to take place. ARPA, many communities are still in the process of expending those funds. So it's going to take a considerable amount of time. And that's another one of our messages, is that this should be an organic process. This is not a quick fix. Most of these successful counties and communities who have developed their broadband look at this as a 5 or 10 year project. And in fact, it's a continual project. And because of that, we have to manage expectations. We have to let people know that fiber or better broadband through wireless connectivity will be coming. It won't be happening tomorrow, but it will be at some point. And we need to let people know when and where it's going to be happening. And we need to prepare them for the idea that this is a long-term project. And my experience from having community meetings is that people are, if they're aware of that, then they relax a bit, especially after the past few years. People have thought that why are they having this problem? Why are they the only ones who don't have good connectivity when everyone else seems to? And when they come together for a community meeting, they realize that others have a similar project, and they know that the providers and county and municipal governments are working to make their circumstances better in terms of broadband. And I did mention about the middle mile network. Again, we think that, first of all, it's very difficult to get detailed information on local connectivity from the providers, and that's understandable from a business point of view because they have a 50% take rate in their area. They don't want to tell us where that is because then their competitors immediately know who doesn't have their connectivity, so they can target them for their own business services or their residential broadband services. The middle mile network is a necessity. Local providers need to make the connection to get the internet. So Oftentimes when we go into a community, the providers will say, well, we don't need middle mile, we have it. The question then is it available and is it affordable? Is there a standard price for providers to make the connection to the middle mile? And if so, what is that? And is it going to be consistent? So counties and municipalities can put themselves in a position of making sure that there is low-cost connectivity for a middle mile network. Let's go to the next slide. So here you see the map, and the overlay here actually masks an enormous amount of data that we did collect. As Barb said, we did the survey, received over 17,000 responses. We mapped those individual survey responses because of the 23 questions. The first question is asking for the address of the respondee, so we know where they are. We also know the degree of satisfaction that the respondee has to their broadband and what the speed is, as much as the person can know, assuming they took the test and the test was accurate. So this middle mile network is designed to get close to those areas that have poor broadband. And you can see from the map, it covers all 18 counties. And you can see the estimated number of connections possible going out 5 miles. We don't expect that there are going to be too many individual connections to this other than the broadband providers. There may be some anchor institutions that connect directly to this middle mile network, but we do expect that over time, most local providers would connect to this network. So I will stop there, and I certainly will respond to any questions, and I expect that Barbara and Peter would as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack, Barbara, Peter. So, Barbara, let me ask you, this what you've done in New North with this incredible collaboration has required so much, but it has required, from where I sit, a shared vision and trust, which doesn't just show up. So we had to get to that point before you were able to have people in New North hold hands toward this effort. How did you get there? What was the magic?
The magic really was Barb. I think she was the one who initially led the conversation and asked the questions, what if? But really, it was the entire team of the first slide that you saw, led by Peter, led by those individuals, where they said, we have this problem. How are we going to fix it? We say communication, trust, flexibility, willingness to be open to possibilities and the what ifs. And I tell people all the time, everything is figure outable. I think that what we're trying to do is we have the same goals, right? We want to get to the same place. We want everyone connected. We want access, affordability, and I'm going to add 2 more to yours is device and digital skilling. So we want all those things. That's the end goal. So how do we work towards getting that? And I think it was really a collective of all those individuals who had that vision at the beginning and then carrying it on from there.
I'll tell you, the accelerant to this whole thing was COVID. I don't think if we had COVID is it not on?
You got to speak closer.
Closer?
Yeah, karaoke.
If there was no COVID, I think we'd be just starting right now on this process. We'd get together, but I think the accelerator was COVID. We all had real pain. People couldn't work from home. People couldn't go to school. And that really was that pain point that brought our region together on this one, because we all had the shared pain. Mm-hmm. And we all had a shared story, too. It's like, well, we know that we're missing, but where are we missing? Who needs it? How do we get it there? And we're not technical. So who can we tap into to solve this problem? Because we don't know what we don't know. Not everyone has an August in their county to run stuff. So I think COVID accelerated the whole process, and we know it was a need, but COVID was the real driver on this one.
So, Jack, we see one challenge here in Northeast Wisconsin, New North. You've seen hundreds across the country. So besides leadership and a good pandemic, what are the necessary ingredients to getting people together to share a vision and work together?
Well, it's actually quite simple. These projects are infrastructure, and counties and cities do that every day. And so I guess the first thing to consider is when you dig a hole in the street, make sure that there's conduit in the hole. Don't even have to put fiber in it. You can do that later on. But as long as you're digging the hole to put in sewer or resurfacing or water, make sure there's conduit there so that providers can come along and either put their own fiber in or the counties and municipalities can put it in. That's the key. And for those cities and municipalities, especially in rural areas across the country that have had to take it upon themselves to do their own broadband, this is where we've seen the success. Places like Dakota County in Minnesota, Sandpoint, Idaho, and other smaller areas, someone in the utility department has said, look, we're digging a hole, let's just put some fiber in, it's pennies on the dollar, and then eventually we can make the connections. I think that's the key to it. You need somebody there, and I've seen this in the counties in New North. There is oftentimes someone who takes it upon themselves to do this. And having good relations with the providers, this is a time to throw out a hello to Steve Schneider and Bug Tussle, mainly because I like saying Bug Tussle. But Steve was attending at many of the meetings that we had in the counties. That was like a camp following. And we've been in communications a couple of times since then. And for a small operation, Steve's a mover and shaker. So thank you very much for your support, Steve.
So, Jack, you had mentioned in your earlier comments that, I'll paraphrase, that local governments shouldn't really be the providers. So what in this time of, I think you said mega dollars or mega available funding, what role do you think the local governments should play? Should they be the recipient of government funds and then the disperser to the private sector, or what's the proper role for government from where you sit?
Well, I'll give you an example of what we did in Bozeman, Montana. We were called in to do a study there. Bozeman is a community, small community, but it does have the university there. And they were looking for a network, fiber network in their business area. We did the study. On the basis of the study, 4 local banks put in $4 million. They set up a nonprofit, and they built an open access network, and there are now 6 internet service providers on that network. So that's an example of what can be done internally, even without any external funding. So just imagine what you could do now between state and federal funding that's available and the experience of the providers at working with communities and getting funding. The sky's the limit, really. Again, but you don't want to overthink it. It's an infrastructure project. It's very simple. If you're doing fiber, be sure that you put conduit in the ground, or you put fiber on the poles if you have access to them. Places like Chattanooga, Tennessee are electric cities. They took advantage of that. And if you're in a rural area and you have access either to towers or places to put them, take advantage of that as well.
Seems to me that the philosophy generally in this nation in previous years, decades, had been there was public sector and the private sector, and never the two shall meet unless there was some sort of regulatory issue. Private sector do what you do, public sector do what you do. But today it appears the thinking is different. The citizens are essentially saying, I see a challenge in society. Public sector, you solve it, or private sector, you solve it. Or why don't you both solve it together? Or how about somebody I never even heard of getting together to solve it? Which is sort of blurring the lines between public and private sector. And that's, I think, why we're getting more toward P3 projects, public-private partnerships, which I think is where this broadband fits into. Local governments getting dollars from the federal government and state, and then working with the private sector to provide a service that society is essentially saying, this isn't a luxury anymore, it's a necessity. So why don't you folks that are in charge, public, private sector, work this out? Does that seem to be where we are today? Mm-hmm. Peter?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, obviously the private sector's in it to make money, and especially in rural communities when you have limited places to make money because you need users, it doesn't make sense. So you do need some public support to make that happen, especially when you have maybe 2 users per 10 miles. And it is a necessity. We got electricity to these places, so I think broadband is something that needs to be there also. And you can't put it on the private sector to fund a money-losing operation, but it is a necessity. So I think we're going to be blurring those lines more and more because this is a need, especially in this area. I don't know in the future what's going to be the next effort, but we did it for electricity. We did it for water. We did it for sewer. Why we need to do it for broadband.
And Mark, from
agriculture is one of the fastest growing data generators in terms of connected traffic, drones for examining fields, for taking care of animals. So there is business out there.
I was going to add the maintenance of tractors as well. That's something I've heard too, is the need for broadband for that. But really from an economic development standpoint, so our goals for economic development is prosperity for all. Whether it's a region, a county, a city, name it, that's our charge. And my background's in construction, and that's something 3P, which is public-private partnership, is something we've seen in the construction world. Municipality had a need, developer came in and built the building and leased it back to municipalities, and that's kind of how it's worked together. So I see that really working for this broadband. But going back to business attraction and my role at New North is I'm hearing a lot of people saying things like, oh, my business in the next 5 years in order to scale, or my business in the next 5 years, I need broadband, I need this to be successful. But we're also hearing it from the individual. We're also hearing it from the talent, the people saying, hey, I need internet access because I need to work from home, education, healthcare, what have you. Historically, business attraction's always been the companies just come in and the people will follow. Well, now it's really flipped. Now it's the talent comes in and then the business follows. So from an economic development standpoint, broadband is essential for the talent as well as the business.
Well, and on the flip side too, talk to your local realtor. What is one of the first questions that a new purchaser is looking for when they walk into a showing? What's the broadband speed here? So, I mean, you need that to sell your homes. I mean, it's critical with work from home becoming more and more prevalent. You're at a disadvantage in your community if you don't have access to broadband. That is an economic driver. You have to have it.
It's a good point. Peter, I think the questions today when people buy a house, number one, what county am I in? Obviously, that would be number one question, right? The counties association. What county am I in? And then secondly, how's the broadband, and are there schools nearby? I mean, that's how go to the schools. And let's be clear about this. I mean, if we're going to succeed as a state, we need to have, while we have a large public sector in this state, if we're going to be successful as a state and positioned for future success, we need a really strong, vibrant private sector doing what they do best, employing people and creating wealth. That is, broadband's a necessary ingredient for that. So when we are public-private partnering with the private sector, there is nothing wrong with the private sector making money. We want them to make money because they're in business tomorrow, so when we have troubles, they're there to solve it. So it's not a bad thing. We have, ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Peter Thillman, Chief. Oh, yes.
We got an online question.
All right.
Real quickly. So the question from Sue Hendrickson is, if we don't have expertise in the county to develop a plan, is there money available to have someone organize a plan for us?
There's someone to do the plan, but you got to figure out who's going to organize that portion of it, because right here, Design 9 did the plan for us. If we did not have New North to gather everyone in to put the group together, it wouldn't happen. So you need to have that impetus within your county or within your region to drive the need, and then you can go get the expertise. And we used EDA funding to get that expertise. And, I mean, there are consultants out there. We chose Design 9, and they did an excellent job.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Peter Thillman, Chief Economic Development Officer with Shawano County Economic Progress, Barbara Koldos, Vice President, Business Development, New North, and Jack Madam, Senior Broadband Analyst with Design 9. Please join me in thanking these three panelists. Thanks, Peter. All right, Jack, you stay right where you are because you're in the next panel as well. and Jack is still with Design 9 on this next panel. Adam Payne, Sheboygan County Administrator. Please join the panel. Celeste Flynn, Director of State Government Affairs for Charter Communications. Dave McCartney, not Paul's brother, but distant relative. Dave McCartney, Peninsula Fiber Network. And my good friend Bill Esbeck, Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Telecommunications Association. Let me move over. Yep. Yeah, he's here. I got him. Adam? I did. And where is Adam?
He's right there.
Oh, okay. All right, middle mile. Let's see, who would like to start this? I have Jack first on my list, but anybody can jump in. All right, Jack it is. Jack, middle mile, tell us a little bit about this.
Okay. Jack, you're on mute. Can you just tell me he's on mute, Mark?
Jack, you're on mute. Jack, you're on mute.
There, thank you. That's better. Any pointers as to what you would like me to discuss other than what we've already said about middle mile?
Well, I think earlier, Jack, you had talked about that there was a focus on the middle mile, but I guess talk with us about the importance of that, so we don't.
Sure.
There's always sort of a tension if we get past that middle mile. So it appears that the focus here was putting a lot of energy and effort into establishing that middle mile to sort of, I guess, avoid that the controversy. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. It is very difficult. There's been allusions to the mapping issues, both in terms of the state and federal efforts from the FCC and TIA and others. And we're now in the process of the federal government undergoing a massive change in how the broadband mapping is accomplished. No longer is it going to be census tracked. As Barbara alluded, you could have one connected individual in a census tract and someone next door or across the street would not necessarily have access to that high-speed broadband. Nevertheless, that census block would be considered to be served in the eyes of the FCC because the data that's provided to the FCC for the mapping is provided by the internet service providers, and for whatever reason, that has been the result in that the mapping is notoriously inaccurate. As a result, the parameters are now changed and individual locations will now be mapped. That's over 100 million locations that have to be located, and their broadband has to be analyzed and the speed has to be calculated for that information to be put on a map. The new mapping is supposedly a very important point for funding for determining unserved and underserved areas. The question is, when will that be done? How accurate will it be? And will it be a tool that can be useful for states and counties to determine who needs broadband? So we know from our mapping and from our surveys where the gaps are in New North, for example. So we can design a middle mile network which provides the function of allowing the local service providers to connect directly to a higher order network, which then connects to the national networks and provides internet around the country and connects anywhere in the country or in the world, for that matter, to an individual's location in New North. The trying to determine the exact locations for the local networks, as I mentioned earlier, is a very difficult process. And this became very apparent in Texas and other locations, and it became very difficult for the county and municipal officials to determine who should get broadband and who shouldn't. So local connections are fraught with all sorts of political baggage. The middle mile, as I mentioned earlier, takes advantage of what New North, EdCog, and other council of government type organizations are trying to do, which is leverage the mass in multi-county locations and provide a service that each individual county and municipality could not do, and that is to make a regional middle mile. So in the past, of course, the providers have determined where the middle mile network should go, often with or without any consultation with the local governments. And because our broadband and communication services in general have grown out of a monopolistic tradition, that's been acceptable, and it's taken quite a while for counties and governments to realize that they have a role in this, and they may in fact even have an ownership role in some way. And the new funding mechanisms that have come about in the federal government, particularly in BEAD, encourage all sorts of organizations to apply. We've talked about PPPs. We've talked about other types of organizations, nonprofits, groups of counties, groups of cities, organizations set up by government entities. And we think that it is important that government have some say, if not ownership, in how their broadband is deployed, who owns it, and to some extent what the prices are going to be. At least that the pricing for both middle mile and local be consistent for all providers and all subscribers. So there, I guess, is how the middle mile plan has been evolved, and it will continue to evolve over the next few years. And we think there are all sorts of possibilities there, and it leverages both what counties and groups of counties can do to provide better broadband for their citizens. So I will stop there, and please feel free to.
You want me to talk about last mile? Oh, we don't. Well, so Charter is a little bit different when it comes to. We don't really talk. Well, we don't talk about middle mile because we essentially build middle mile and last mile. But what we've been doing is, obviously, I'm not sure how many counties I've had the opportunity to talk to. I know I've talked to Adam. But if you don't know, Charter received about, in Wisconsin, $168 million from RDOF to build out to 140,000 locations. And so in addition to that $168 million that we received from the FCC, our company is investing $500 million. So our RDOF build is going to take place in 52 Wisconsin counties. We have 6 years to build it out, but obviously our company is very committed to completing this build way ahead of schedule. Of course, we'll need, Wisconsin's weather to cooperate. But I think, this is year one, and we started the year already ahead because we were planning. What we essentially did is created a whole new team specifically to concentrate on our RDOF build. Wisconsin was the largest state that received, for Charter Communications, we received the largest amount of dollars and the largest amount of locations out of 24 of our 40 states. So I started about 25 years ago this year, only introducing or going community by community to get franchise agreements to offer cable service. And so certainly the industry has changed. I find it very exciting, and I actually am very happy to be here in person to do these kind of information center or information, so we can all share information, because it's kind of challenging doing it, over Zoom. But two, I think it just makes it's just easier when you're talking to people in person, trying to answer questions, because broadband is not very easy to explain, and plus people don't really know. They don't know what EPON is, or and they honestly don't even care. All they want is to turn on their computers, and they want it to work. I've also had the pleasure of serving on the Governor's Task Force with Brittany and so many of you in the audience. And so that was 2 years. And so I've had, a lot of time to listen to other providers, what it is they're offering. I can obviously only speak to what my company provides. And so we go back to middle mile. What Charter provides is fiber to the home. What we're building is fiber to the home in 51 counties, specifically for RDOF, but that doesn't mean that we've stopped, because in addition to what we're building for RDOF, we continue to participate in the the state broadband grant program. We recently received 4 grants. I think Sean, if he's still here, one of which is in Kenosha County. I'm happy to report that our last 2020 grant, we are celebrating its completion on Thursday up in the town of Lincoln and the town of Washington in Vilas County. So we've been really busy trying to expand broadband throughout Wisconsin. What else do you want me to talk about?
Why don't we stop right there?
Sure.
Dave, want to talk about Peninsula Fiber Network's view of this?
Yeah, Peninsula Fiber Network was created by 2 local ILECs, incumbent carriers, back in 2004. And we fundamentally are created for the purpose of getting better internet for those ILEC customers. But as part of that, we have worked publicly with the UP 911 councils. We've worked with multiple governments, banks, and other organizations. We have created a really reliable, redundant network, and currently we carry 5 million 911 calls for the state of Michigan. That includes next generation services, routing, and other things. But what it comes down to is PFN was created on a commitment to the community, to partnerships with locals. We know we cannot do it alone, but we also stand behind our product. We have to because that's what the customer wants at the end of the day. We do sell to multiple ISPs. We even sell to Charter for a couple of services to get to places where they are not able to serve. So it's an issue of cooperation, looking out there going forward. It doesn't stop. We are very much dependent upon the availability of construction assets, laborers. I know Wisconsin is working to create technical people, and I think that's a great issue because we have a constraint right now on electronics and equipment, but those people necessary to take the next steps, we need to be talking about that now because they're going to be, everything needs to be maintained. When my uncle decides that he can't see the program he wants to, he's going to call us up and says, fix it. Not, oh, I understand your guy's on vacation, or as UP happens November 15th, is out chasing Bambi. But that was, believe it or not, when we did work with Verizon Wireless, I sat in the Wisconsin, down in Madison with the guy, and one of the things I said is, what are you going to do about hunting season? So it's maybe a little bit of a joke, but it does matter. You have to care about the reliability, redundancy, and we stand behind it. As part of our product, we give credits back for failures to perform. But that is just one of it. I think you need to hold any provider comes in here, especially with any grant, to performance, both on and off. I'd like to pass on, since I'm near the beloved field, I want to pass on one football analogy. We are all going to get tackled. It doesn't matter. We're all going to fall forward for yards, and then get up and keep moving.
Bill, your folks are involved in middle mile and last mile, all of it. What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thank you for Right into the microphone. How are we doing? All right, good. Thank you for acknowledging our friendship. I appreciate that. I also want to acknowledge some WSTA members in the room here. We've got Bob Webb and Beata Wurzba from Ensight. I believe online we've got Scott Nyman from Wittenberg, and I'm not sure who may be watching online from TDS or Marquette Adams Telephone Cooperative, but those are some of the WSTA members in the New North region that I just want to mention. We agree with the general trend that was identified in the survey. We agree that people want better and faster internet connections. They want, more options. We agree that there are last mile issues requiring last mile solutions. I think that's pretty clear. We want to, as an association and our individual member companies, we want to continue to be part of the progress that has been happening in recent years. And I want to take a quick step back and talk about some of the FCC data that all of you can Google at the FCC, the National Broadband Map. We've talked about the issues that are present with that data. We can all agree that this is not a perfect data set, but it is illustrated of the progress that has been made in recent years. And I'll give you a couple quick data points. On a statewide basis, between 2016 and 2020, the presence of 25x3 internet connectivity, and that's what the FCC currently defines as broadband, when you have DSL, cable, fiber, and fixed wireless as the technologies, the presence of 25x3 service on a statewide basis has increased from 85% to 97% between 2016 and 2020. If you look just at rural Wisconsin, those same four technologies, DSL, cable, fiber, and fixed wireless, again, the same time frame, the same 25x3 service, that connectivity has increased from 54% to 90% in rural Wisconsin. There has been progress. There is still progress yet to be made. We agree with that. And from a mapping perspective, the federal government made a very prudent decision to not release the BEAD funding that's coming. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion about BEAD funding later. But the federal government will not release the BEAD funding until there are more accurate, more granular maps. And that is expected either later this year or early next year. So that timeline is in place. It is a significant carrot to allow states like Wisconsin to get maybe $1 billion or more in BEAD funding. So having said that we agree that there's a last mile issue requiring last mile solutions, I want to talk about the middle mile here for a minute. There are already multiple existing middle mile solutions throughout the New North region. And I'm going to ask Kenan here for an assist. I asked Kenan to Google Ensight Wholesale Network for me. And you can do this on your smartphones. You can do this online. Ensight Wholesale Network. That is an existing middle mile network, a very robust existing middle mile network with capacity of up to 100 gigabits per second. And on page 56 of the report, there's a list of providers. I think that's the reference to the business portion of the survey, but there's a list of providers. All of the providers with a significant presence in the New North region have an existing middle mile network. It may not look exactly like that, but it's going to look similar to that in many cases. And these are open networks. The providers share those fiber routes with each other. Sometimes they swap fiber routes. Sometimes they sell fiber routes. But these are not restricted networks that providers own and exclusively use for their own purposes. But that is, one example of an existing fiber network in Wisconsin. When I looked at the primary recommendation, and the cover of the report has a depiction of the proposed middle mile network, my question is why is this the recommendation? There appears to be a disconnect between the identification of the last mile needs and the last mile solutions and the recommendation for a middle mile network. And I looked at the study. I couldn't identify anywhere in the study whether or not the question had been asked if there are already existing middle mile networks that this would be duplicating. And the answer to that question is there are. If this middle mile network moved forward, I would expect that some of the same right-of-way would be used for the proposed middle mile network compared to the existing middle mile network. In summary, I would say it'd be a waste of money to pursue a middle mile network as depicted in the report. And not only that, it would be a colossal waste of money. So that's, I hate to rain on anyone's parade who thought this was a good idea. It is not a good idea. Middle mile networks exist. Multiple middle mile networks are already in the ground in the New North region. It would not just be a waste of money, it would be a colossal waste of money. Mark?
All right, Jack, think about that for a little bit, and we'll ask for a response in just a moment. But for now, let's hear from...
I can respond now if you...
Okay, Adam, just hang on to your thoughts. Jack, go ahead.
Sure. I've mentioned a couple of times in the first time I spoke during this panel how we arrived at the recommendation of a middle mile and design for a middle mile. We think that the middle mile not only has to be available, it also has to be affordable. And while we think that certainly in principle, there's nothing wrong with private companies owning a middle mile, but a middle mile is critical, certainly, to the development of local networks. And by its very nature and definition, it tends to pass through multiple political boundaries. So the question is, who controls it? Who owns it? What's it going to cost? And what is the availability? In other words, how many strands of fiber are on there? If it's a fiber network or if it's a wireless network, what are the frequencies and capacity of the network? So we looked at all of those, and we know we're trying to design a network for the future. So to use another sports analogy, we're trying to go where the puck's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years or longer, because we know that fiber that's been installed 50 years ago is still functional and will be functional in the future. I'll just give you an example. We manage the construction of a network in a small community called Highlands, North Carolina, in western North Carolina. And the city specified 864 strands in their backbone because they think that in the future, every business is going to want to have their own fiber strand for capacity and for security reasons. So they are planning for that. And we've built the network to meet that specification. We know that there has been a great development in what's called high-density fiber, fibers that hold 3,456 strands that are no bigger than about an inch across. So we know that that's coming, and we know the capacity requirements are coming, and we want to be prepared for that. And we also want to make sure that that capacity is available to all local providers at a reasonable price for a long period of time so they can design their business accordingly. So those are some of the reasons that we came up with the proposal for a middle mile. And while we recognize that there is some capacity available now, we think that there's certainly room for additional capacity in the future. So that's my initial response there.
All right, Adam, from the county perspective and from, I guess, a 30,000-foot level, what do you see on middle and last mile?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark, Jim, Barb, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to pull us out of the weeds a little bit and talk more from a county administrator perspective, and perhaps like many of you, this is like learning a foreign language. I appreciated Peter's comments about, how much COVID really exasperated the need for this and brought us together and how important it is for our community. But just going back a little bit, falling back a little bit from a county perspective, it was really in 2015 that I really started learning about fiber and the importance of broadband, because we have 19 departments in Sheboygan County. Many of them are not connected, relying on wireless, and it wasn't secure. It wasn't reliable. The speed wasn't there, and some departments, such as our county nursing home, could watch their keying as they typed. It was completely unacceptable. And our IT director came forward and said, we can do better. And in short, we established a partnership between the city of Sheboygan, Sheboygan County, and the school district to create our own ring of fiber in Sheboygan County, and learned so much from that. But we addressed the security, we addressed the backup, we addressed the reliability. Speed is no longer an issue, and we partnered. We partnered together to make a long-term investment that is going to serve our community for decades to come. Of course, then COVID rears its ugly head, and we all have our lives turned upside down, and we all had to pivot and change our approach. Many of our employees were working from home. Many of your employees, our businesses' employees, were working from home. And suddenly we were talking about the importance of fiber and reliability, and the reason we're all here today and continue to have these discussions. But when we received $22.4 million from the ARPA allocation, there was a great deal of interest in Sheboygan County in investing in broadband, as there was in child care, workforce development, affordable housing, transportation. So in Sheboygan County, we took the initiative to create a community engagement task force in all of these areas, and one focused on broadband. And have we learned a lot? Our IT director, Chris Lewinsky, is with us here today. A shout out to all county IT directors, city, municipality, town. They are worth their weight in gold. They're so important to our collaboration and sharing information. Chris chaired our task force, which had membership from school districts, the Sheboygan County Economic Development Corporation, businesses, and others. And ultimately, they looked at the maps, or the lack thereof, and the need and importance of better understanding that. They looked at the areas in Sheboygan County that were underserved, and we really started listening. And to Mark's point earlier, county government, we're pretty good at implementing transportation systems, highway, airport. We want our businesses like Kohler and Sargento and Master Gallery and Johnsonville, we want our businesses all to be successful. Hadn't really heard much focus on the county taking the lead with broadband investments until COVID. And now there's a tremendous interest in seeing it, as you all know, throughout the community, whether it's Sheboygan County or yours. But I feel that if there's a takeaway from this process thus far, it's that if you're not engaged, you need to be engaged. If you're a municipal leader, you need to step forward, and particularly for the counties. And I think many of our 28 local units of government in Sheboygan County really look to the counties to provide a leadership or collaboration role. And we welcome it. We welcome it. We're certainly working and convening with our heads of local government, with our business community, and certainly our Sheboygan County Economic Development Corporation. So at this point, we've received a grant through our Sheboygan County Economic Development Corporation to work on a middle mile. We have a local internet provider, Bertram Communication, that certainly is very interested in doing more. But then we have Charter and others that are interested in doing more as well. Our county board has already allocated $2 million of ARPA funds to leverage with others. There could be more on the way. We still have some ARPA funds in reserve. But that partnership, that collaboration, that leadership at the county level, Learning this new foreign language and asking the questions, it's so important. And I encourage you as you go down this road and as we continue to work together as a region and look at the mapping and looking at opportunities to leverage funding. Again, to the point I think Mark and others have made already, this is so important for our communities and economic development. And we look forward to the challenge and look forward to working with others to make good things happen.
So, panelists, in talking with my colleagues around the nation, there's almost a paralyzation about what to do when it comes to middle mile, last mile. And part of that paralyzing is making sure we don't make a mistake or expending the dollars most efficiently and effectively. And hanging out there all the time, it seems all the time, is this promise that we're a whisper away from the Elon Musk Starlink system or the Kuiper system. And eventually, up from above, we're going to get high-speed internet everywhere you can breathe on the planet. So it handcuffs us. How would you respond to that? Is that a legitimate fear? I mean, some folks would say, well, the speed's not going to be anywhere near what you can get on the ground. But is that legitimate or not?
Mark, I'll take a shot at that. But first, I want to respond a little bit to what Jack commented on. Nothing of what Jack shared changes the fact that there are multiple existing competitive middle mile networks in the New North region. That is just a fact. Any effort spent on a new North middle mile network would be a waste of time, energy, and resources. And with last mile opportunities on the horizon, Wisconsin is applying for a federal grant under the Capital Projects Fund that may be around $190 million. That's last mile money. And Jaron may have an update on that. I don't know if I'm breaking any news here today, but the BEAD funding on the horizon, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment funding through the Department of Commerce, that's a potential $1 billion opportunity. That is a last mile program. If you are distracted by middle mile at this point in time, you are wasting time, energy, and resources. And Mark, to your question about Starlink and Elon Musk and some of the satellite opportunities that are coming online, there are going to be locations in Wisconsin and throughout the nation that may be currently 3 miles from their nearest neighbor. And serving that one location would require a 3-mile fiber route. That's an incredibly expensive customer to serve with fiber. Elon Musk's solution may be a great option for them at this point in time. I don't know, what their options are going to be moving forward. I'm aware of beta testing that my members have done in northern Wisconsin using Starlink, where they're getting download speeds of 175 megabits per second. That's a very robust download speed for a satellite service. And the difference between the low Earth orbit options that Elon Musk is pursuing versus the stationary, and I'm forgetting the technical term here, I apologize, the stationary satellites that they use for traditional satellite service, those would get maybe 25 meg down. Those are some of the speeds. I think those are improving also, but they are not having the success with the high download speeds that Elon Musk is offering. Those are very suitable solutions in some cases. They are not as good as a fiber to the home connection. They will probably never be as good as a fiber to the home connection, but in some cases that may be a very viable option.
If I could respond briefly to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
The plan that we developed for New North was developed over about a 4-month period, roughly from early fall to beginning of this year, early fall of last year, beginning of this year. And it was apparent to all providers both local, long distance, middle mile, that we were doing this. And one thing New North did was provide very good promotion of the plan to all interested parties, providers, and recipients, residents, businesses, county and municipal government. We had a meeting with Insight after the plan was done that was arranged by Barbara Coldus. So I'm not sure what Insight was thinking while this plan was going on, but there was plenty of opportunity to respond. We had a number of calls and visits with all of the counties. Our charter, I know, was on a number of calls, made contributions, made their point of view known. So the question is, why did we receive very little information from Insight regarding the network? They did provide us, after the plan was done, with a small amount of information that we did include in addendums. But if in fact there's so much middle mile fiber available, where is it? What do we know about it? What are the costs? Who is it available to? How was it built? What is the capacity? The middle mile plan that was built as part of the recovery from the last recession that we had back in 2008, that was built over about a 3-year period to about 2011. That was built with 48 strands of fiber. Typically now municipalities and counties put in 288 strands, and as I mentioned, in High Point, Highlands, North Carolina, it was 864, and large providers and cities are putting in fiber that has 1,000 or more strands. So the point is that while there may be some fiber now for middle mile, and it may be adequate for the current capacity, we don't think that in the future it's going to be adequate. If we can be shown otherwise, then we would be glad to make that known. And I'm sure that New North would also be glad to know exactly what's available now and what the costs are.
I think after the program today, we'll connect Bill and Jack so you can have a good conversation. I mean, we're all working toward the same thing, which is a maximum number of people having the maximum speed of broadband everywhere we live. So we'll connect you gentlemen after the program. But Celeste and Dave, Bill made an interesting point. The Starlink or Kuiper system, a satellite system, may never be as good as fiber. And with the availability of I shouldn't say sufficient, some federal dollars, it's never going to be enough, but some federal dollars, it kind of leads us to, gee, don't wait. Let's get rolling. Let's go. What are your thoughts on the satellite system?
On the satellite system, my direct reaction is if you're trying to get the absolute best answer for a plan, you're never going to get it. You're going to be paralysis by analysis. And if you're going to head down that path, I've seen it, I've been involved in discussions, and it doesn't get you. What you're looking for is a good solution to meet the needs of your community now and tomorrow. And so if you're going to bet on it tomorrow, you can roll the dice and roll that. But my best guess, my best intuition is to go with the services that are today, the technology that works today, and not bet on tomorrow's technology, absolutely on tomorrow's technology. That said, you need to be open to be flexible in your process. This is not a one-time decision. This is an ongoing methodology that you're going to have to continue to talk, have to continue to look, and have to continue to estimate. I was thinking when the discussions were going on, what is broadband? In 2001, and unfortunately at the same time of September 11th, I was actually at a convention in Michigan, and one of the questions that was asked is, what is broadband? And at that time, the best answer I heard, it's what the customer wants. It's going to change tomorrow. It's going to change the next day. You have to be willing to take it forward and go forward. If I'm out of my camp, I think Elon Musk's solution might work. At my house, that's not the solution I want. At my business, it's absolutely not the solution I want. I want fiber access, and quite frankly, I want 2 fibers in, given redundancy and reliability that I need to operate on a day-to-day basis.
Isn't the big problem going to be with the Elon Musk Starlink satellites? Where are you going to charge all these things, right? I mean, where's a lot of charging stations up in the space? I'm just joking. Just go ahead, Celeste.
So maybe I guess I would like to share Charter's approach, and maybe it's just a little too simple, but I think our approach is to kind of concentrate on getting service to the home. And so if I'm going to Adam, I'm asking him, give me all your addresses, and just so that we can make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. So if you have all your addresses, give them to me, and I will scrub them against where Charter has service. Who of those addresses, where does Charter serve your residents today? Then let's take a look at the remaining addresses. The remaining addresses, are they going to be served in RDOF? Then we remove those. Are they going to be served by somebody else's RDOF? We remove those. So then what's left? What's left are the people who don't have any service, and we need to get service to them. So I'm not talking about, maybe I'm on the wrong panel, but I'm not talking about the middle mile or whatever. I'm talking about let's get service to the people who don't have access to service. And then let me run a cost estimate. And whatever that cost estimate is, let's find a way, whether it's using federal dollars, ARPA dollars, CARES Act dollars, state broadband grant dollars, let's find a way to get them service. Maybe Charter's not the closest provider to that address, but at least I can tell you which ones are, and then we can figure out if we can make the financials work. That's the approach that we're taking. And so, I urge the counties that, we've had an opportunity to meet with several of you, but we're looking at, where we have such a large footprint existing today in Wisconsin. RDOF, we're literally building an additional 40% on top of that. So let's take a look at what's left, because in the end, shame on us if we cannot get whoever wants access to service, considering the amount of investment and infrastructure that's going to go into the ground.
And I want to thank Celeste for her very effective approach working with Sheboygan County and our local officials. To Mark's question, there's skepticism about investing millions of dollars in fiber that local government has no control over, right? We're investing millions of taxpayer dollars into this infrastructure, and what will the costs be in the future? Who's going to control this? What's it going to mean for our customers? And so when a provider goes to a town, city, village, county and says, we're looking for $3, $4, $30 million to put broadband fiber throughout the community, you can almost see everyone sit back in their chair and go, what? How are we going to come up with that, bond for that? Yes, we have ARPA funds, but the requests are far greater. So when Celeste met with Chris and I to talk about this is what Charter's planning, here is the mapping, here's how we think we can work for you, and specifically getting into the weeds of, and here's our investment as an internet service provider, rather than putting that all essentially at the doorstep of a town, city, village, or the county. It starts creating a comfort level and building trust and rapport. And I think that's really important through this process, because most decision makers, at least at the local level, they don't understand this well enough to make multi-million-dollar decisions. So I really need good, effective communicators to build that trust and rapport.
We have been talking with Jack Tatum of Design 9, Adam Payne of Sheboygan County, Celeste Flynn of Charter Communications, Dave McCartney of Peninsula Fiber Network, and Bill Esbeck of the Wisconsin State Telecommunications Association. And yes, please join me in thanking them. And then Barb, you're going to take please join me in thanking the panelists. Number one. Go ahead, Barb.
Thank you. I just have one kind of follow-up question, and so thank you very much for the panel. And so we know we have a representative here from NTIA. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to do a deeper dive with our Public Service Commission coming up on these 4 areas of funding, right? So we talk about BEAD, we talk about digital equity, we talk about tribal expansion of internet into broadband and into tribal properties. And the 4th one is very specific for middle mile. So I think maybe, Bill, a question for you with your members. We know those applications, as of last time we checked, are due September 30th. So as a region, we're trying to figure out, is this something that we pull together, a regional application to help enhance middle mile options? We know there's middle mile already in our region. Or, Bill, maybe are your members in conversations and kind of chunking it up, a tri-county, a 2-county, working with providers and then submitting applications specifically to enhance the middle mile that's already in existence? Or are you saying, Northeast Wisconsin, we're good, we're covered, we don't need to look at that grant funding because we have those needs met?
No, thank you for that question. I don't know specifically if WSTA members are looking at middle mile grant opportunities. What I can tell you is that the middle mile that exists today is far more robust than the middle mile that existed 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The 100 gigabit per second middle mile that Ensight maintains is much more robust today than it was a few years ago. I guarantee you it wasn't 100 gigabits per second 10 years ago. So they are continuously reinvesting in their own middle mile networks, whether or not they're looking for grant funding to supplement those investments. I'm not specifically aware of, but again, the report identified a last mile problem and proposes a middle mile solution. That's a huge disconnect for me when we have all of these last mile opportunities on the horizon with the Capital Projects Fund and BEAD funding, and those are last mile programs. An opportunity will be missed if the time, energy, and resources are wasted on duplicating existing middle mile investments.
I'd like to add one more thing. Peninsula Fiber is a WSTA member, and we are actively looking at middle mile grants anywhere we can do it, because we know that we need to get in front of the solution, but we also need to work with matching the needs of the communities we serve. And if we don't do that, we're just, again, throwing the dollars away, because at the end of the day, it is about providing broadband to businesses, governments, people. And if we don't come that as our goal, we'll miss it. We'd like to earn some money along the way, yes. But at the end of the day, if we can't serve our customers, we're out of business.
All right, Celeste, gentlemen, thank you very much, and we will move on. All right, our next program is going to be Addressing the Rural Challenge. We will have as panelists Brittany Beyer, Executive Director of Grow North and also Chair of the Governor's Commission on Broadband Access, Jessica Hatch, Broadband Coordinator in Door County, and Steve Schneider, President and CEO of everyone's favorite pronunciation company, Bug Tussle Wireless. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Addressing the Rural Challenge, opportunities and challenges. Brittany, you want to start out?
Sure.
And talk right into the microphone.
Yeah, I think I'm going to hold it.
Yeah, that's good.
As I snap my finger. So I just want to set the context for what sometimes you see in a rural county versus somewhere that's a little bit more populated. In my role as a regional economic development director, I oversee 8 counties and 3 tribal nations. Some of them are shared with New North, but they're all 100% rural. So we don't have population density in some areas. So going to the county level, because I think that's a really great place to start. We discovered, especially when COVID was really, really hitting us hard, that multiple counties didn't have county administrators. They just didn't have the funds for them, and so they didn't have that type of person in place who could hold the whole entire picture, who could really manage multiple grants and oversight in different areas, and that really made a huge difference. A lot of times, it's brought up earlier, before COVID, counties were really not thinking that broadband was something that they had to oversee. So it was not on their radar, and so they don't have the specialty already attracted to some of the positions. Multiple IT directors are not in the broadband conversation. We're talking mapping, and GIS is used for the on-the-ground planning and looking at all of your assets. Some of those land information officers are not at the table. Some of my counties don't even have a land information or a GIS professional because they don't have the funds for it. So as we start to get more complex and have more needs put on this local partnership inside of the table, I think we have to remember rural communities are going to be working double time to get to the table. I have multiple counties that have Economic Development Corporation directors that are part-time, if they have an economic development person. And so you have to think about the resources that are on the ground that are going to be different in that type of situation. So then we go into understanding the whole picture and being able to have a conversation with the providers. Clearly, that is a very important piece of the puzzle. New North demonstrated that with the great amount of work that they did in convening all of those different partners at the table at a regional level. Some of that work has to even be done on a local level, at a county level, bringing together a task force or a commission or whatever you want to call it. Someone needs to be there to drive it. And a lot of these counties feel as if they don't have the staff time, the funds for it. It's coming from a volunteer person, maybe they're retired. But the truth of the matter is that to get to a really good multi-million-dollar grant proposal, you have had to have been doing at least 6 months to a year of work in order to be viable. And so this is a really important thing to think about as we're talking about all of the counties that are coming to the table to do this work. And then let's bump it up just a little bit. So my sneaking suspicion is that these BEAD dollars that are going to be flowing down, to be competitive, you're going to have to be sitting in somewhere in the $10 million mark. Might be a multi-county proposal. It has to have match. And so having some way to support the building of that match is going to be really important. New North did that specifically for the EDA and is willing to do that for other items. And with Grow North, we're kind of sitting kind of like 3 steps back, but still doing the same thing. But we're very well aware that someone needs to have that energy and the drive to do that. But there's so much learning that has to happen. And that really comes from technical assistance consulting programs that could be available. That was certainly something that we talked about at the task force level. I'll just bring up a Minnesota example because it happens. The Blandin Foundation has technical assistance that the communities can go through kind of a broadband boot camp. And then after they're done with that broadband boot camp, they have the capacity to apply for a first planning grant. And so how do we build those models inside of Wisconsin? You know, there's real hope that that is available. I would say as a technical assistance model, especially in rural communities and all over the state, we lean on the extension officers. So if you have a UW extension office, hopefully someone in that office is doing the community and economic development, and that could be a resource. but it's really thinking about who can be the guide on the local level. And this is a behemoth of information to learn, right? So we need guides, we need continual leadership at that level. I won't go into what we've done to help all of the regions of economic development just a little bit, but we know that New North is doing this work, Grow North is doing this work, M7, MadRep, Seven Rivers, we're all doing this work, and we're working together to make sure that if there's best practices happening, we all are looking at it. Everyone talks about August as like the shining example. He's so modest, but he's really the person who, of course, he's in Brown County, and they did that mapping and have the way forward that we're all looking at, and that can be adapted to a rural model. But just one more thing on the learning, it is communication, it is making sure there's continual learning. It's bringing the communities that are a little bit further behind up to the starting level and supporting people all the way through. Who do we depend on? We're talking about economic development, but our statewide associations and the training that they do, and making sure that we're all talking about broadband as this essential thing that we need to be working on. And then you're going to see the results. So I would say almost every county that I have has had successful PSC grants, and those who are just coming to the table are now very well aware of the urgency behind broadband. And I think what that just tells me that some of them are at the starting gate. We need to help them further along.
August, I didn't know you had such a fan club. I'm a member, I'll tell you that. Jessica, Door County is one of the most beautiful counties in the state, of course. I think we'd all agree with that. Unique rural challenges in Door County. How are you tackling them, and what are the opportunities?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here today, and also August Fan Club also. And thank you for putting me before him so I don't have to follow him. So when it comes to challenges, Door County, we always joke we're kind of a special snowflake. We have all of the challenges, topography challenges, tree challenges, surrounded by water, and we are a dead-end county. So we have everything that you could imagine to try to tackle as challenges, but really what it came down to was, our local EDC, the county, municipalities, and even some businesses came together at the same time the New North report was being done and determined that we were going to fund our own engineering report in the county that was going to give us the answers that we needed to move forward. So we chose to work with Finley Engineering, and really, to no surprise, the answer is fiber to the premise for all of the businesses and residents. I have 6 years in fixed wireless previous to stepping into this position, and seeing those challenges and trying to work through those challenges in Door County, it's not the answer there. You cannot serve people that are on a 20-acre parcel in the middle of the woods that want those trees right up to their house and want their privacy. You're never going to get the penetration and coverage that you want with it. So really, fiber to the premise is our answer in Door County. The engineering report really determined the first step for us was the need to have someone in a position that is going to be leading this and coordinating with the community. So thankfully, I was chosen for that position, and the county chose to fund my position under our ARPA funding. So I always joke, the better I do, the shorter my job is, but super happy to be in this position. and tackling the challenges that we have with those topography challenges and communication with our municipalities. Really, it's just a lot of me educating them and being that engagement on the ground and working with our municipalities. The first thing that we did was form a committee at a county level with subject matter experts, and then kind of determine we need to find a way to bridge the gap and help our municipalities understand the need for this and how to tackle this and what to do that. So I was tasked with a checklist and a playbook for all of them, and we hosted a municipal summit and invited everyone to sit with us. We provided them our playlist, our checkbook, checklist. They were provided municipal maps from our GIS department that have the roadways on it, and an entire like CSV file from our GIS, and here's all your addresses. So, outlined for those committees, in 6 steps, this is how you're going to break this down, this is what you're going to look at, this is the work that you need to do, and then ultimately choose a partnership with an ISP and interview them. And we have a very open sharing process throughout the county with all of our municipalities and the work that's happening. So we have seen success stories. Washington Island was funded to have their submarine cable replaced and fiber to the residents and premises, and that work is underway in an Insight partnership with them. Bailey's Harbor was funded fiber to the premise this year in those June awards with the Public Service Commission in a partnership with Insight as well. And there was a lot of learning during that process that has been shared from those communities throughout the other communities, and the committees that are being started and stood up in all of those municipalities they're talking to each other. They're working with each other. They're having those discussions. They understand it's a big lift, and they understand that there's a lot of work to do, but they're tackling it. And when they have questions, I'm there at committee meetings, and I'm the outreach, and I'm the support. And I know enough to be dangerous, but when I don't know the answers, I have a great outreach of sources at the Public Service Commission, August, who made my head spin the first day that I talked to him. But now we have great conversations. I reach out to the ISPs and have conversations and get answers. I refer to our engineering report and get answers. I do the work for them in areas that they can't get it, and then hand over the information to them so that we can keep moving forward, really is what it comes down to. And focus on those synergies and how the county can step in, what we can do, what we can provide. We all know there is more data needed in mapping. We saw, Bailey's Harbor leveraged their own survey to get the data that they needed to show improve that they were unserved, and saw great success with that with their Public Service Commission grant. So really what we did at a committee level was determine we're going to partner. We need a survey. What are we going to do? We need more data. We're going to partner with the Public Service Commission and have been under their WISER survey, and working with Colta at the Public Service Commission and getting that data out. And our municipalities are now, mailing it out, canvassing it, getting it out through our economic development, getting it out through not-for-profits in the area, getting it out through Destination Door County, tourism zone. School districts have it out. So we have started pushing that publicly on July 29th, and as of yesterday, I know we already have over 1,000 responses that have come in, and I decided to go grassroots with that, where we just took the important data for the unserved, and there's even a paper survey you can have and send in answer to me that I will, I'm putting that into Wiser for people that don't have service, because we are so unserved. How can you take a survey for broadband if you don't have a service to take it? So we have a very large, aging and retired population in Door County. 40 to 50% is over 60, and there are digital education, issues where they don't understand how to do this. So if you have a paper survey in your hand and you can mail it back to me or email it back to me, we're seeing a great response with that.
Steve, a big part of your business is in solving rural challenges. What do you see?
See a Need, Fill a Need is our program. By the way, I too am a member of the August fan club.
I think we need buttons.
We really were not in the middle mile business until we were asked to go into it. We really were not in outside of a small area where we started. Our whole genesis was when Fond du Lac County came to us and said, we have major issues here. I think that a robust competitive environment has existed in middle-sized communities, but it's non-existent in rural communities. And so when I go to Towns Association meetings and I go to county broadband committee meetings, or I have the town of Franklin and Manitowoc County say, please help us, we're losing population, or we've got representatives of the town of Brillion, and while a middle mile may go through the town of Brillion, it doesn't stop there. And I grew up on a farm outside of Kellnersville, Wisconsin, and a fantastic middle mile went right across our front lawn, but we couldn't get service from Frontier, and that was the first fixed wireless tower that I built, was to serve our own farm because nobody else would serve us. I appreciate Celeste's remarks because I agree with them 100%. We go out of our way to not go over the top of other people because there's so much out there to be done that if Charter's doing an area, we want to do a different area that Charter isn't doing. And we want to get there as fast as possible, as Charter, I think, wants to get there as fast as possible because consumers are demanding it and it's necessary for economic development. I also agree with Bill on some things, not everything, but most things. And, we've looked at counties that have said, we want you to do a proposal, and we said, absolutely not, because there's a LEC there that's been there 100 years, and they've got a phenomenal middle mile network in that county, and why would we go there? And so, you're never going to see us in Vernon County. You're never going to see us in Bayfield County because Novato and Vernon County, they do a fantastic job.
Steve, is your mic on?
I probably need to be closer, or maybe it's not on. That says it's on. Better? Excuse me. So I think that, definition of middle mile may come into whether it's a colossal waste or not. There are pieces of middle mile that probably should not be built. I see no reason to put a fifth middle mile down the Highway 29 corridor or the I-94 corridor or many of the other middle mile corridors where there's 4 or 5 people over the top of each other. However,
Steve, I hate to do this. Can you just use that mic?
This mic?
Yeah, that mic.
You might want to hold it.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. However, I don't have any of your members' bill to call when I'm up in Rhinelander. And I built 356 towers in the last 7 years. And every one of your members who had a middle mile, I'm using their network, either through WIN or directly through them. So I don't have an issue with your comments. I do have an issue with the fact that not every county is blessed to be part of those middle mile networks. And so While it's getting there, there are a lot that are at the bottom of the pile. So there isn't a middle mile that runs along Lake Winnebago down all the homes and in Calumet County. Do I want to go to Winnebago County? Probably not, because there's a middle mile network there already that serves its purpose. When Alan Beekle called me back in 2012, I said, I don't want to be in Fond du Lac County. It's a metro area. You have all the services you want. And he called me 4 times, he or Aaron Jared, before I agreed to look at it, because they said, the problem isn't Fond du Lac. The problem is Rosendale and the areas once you get a mile outside of Waupun and outside of Campbellsport and Eden. We just built a tower in Eden. It's the first one that provides any level of 25 meg service there, and there's nobody doing fiber to the home. So there's enough there for all of us providers that we don't have to beat on each other. But we have to be coordinated, because the issue that I see in rural Wisconsin is that many of the networks were ad hoc, which worked 50 years ago. But the requirement for redundancy today means that it has to be a planned network, and you don't run to these 50 homes because it's profitable and these 10 homes because I'm going past them anyway. So our secret sauce with the counties has been, we've gone to the counties after Fond du Lac because we learned from Fond du Lac. And we said, what do you want? So we go to the Towns Association meetings and we ask the towns, and some of them are really mean to me because they're really upset. Because they're like, we've been listening to people tell us we're going to get service for 30 years now, and we don't even have cellular service. So what has really moved us forward is coming in and saying, what can we do to get you service now so you can function in your daily life, so you can access your tax bill online instead of having to go down to the courthouse and get a hard copy because you can't download it on internet. What do you need for that? And we found that fixed wireless is a great short-term solution. I know at a previous discussion, Bob Webb brought up, be very careful about fixed wireless. It isn't the end-all. We agree with that. In fact, in all of our projections we do for counties, fixed wireless becomes a simple $7 feature charge in a couple of years. Because once there's fiber to every home, then fixed wireless is a backup. It's also more mobile than fiber. I can't take my fiber out to the back 40 if I need it at a hunting cabin. You know, one of my first installations was in Hilbert for a guy by the name of Paul Gale, who wanted his grandchildren to be able to watch Netflix in his hunting stand so they'd get interested in hunting with him. And so we accommodated that. Now, that's maybe a superfluous use of resources and time, but people do expect service wherever they want it, whenever they want it, however they want it. The other thing we find is that if I ask a room at a Towns Association meeting of what is broadband, usually there are crickets. And then usually somebody says, I don't know, but my cell phone sure doesn't work worth crap. And so many times people from a broadband perspective go to cellular. And we have sites that we have difficulty doing microwave because we have more traffic than we can handle with a 1 gig microwave. So what we're doing is trying to future-proof all of our middle mile in our planned counties. We have 11 counties we're installing right now. We have another 12 in discussion. We have a total of 34, roughly half of the state, that we have some level of discussion going on with, or approval process, or bonds that have been issued. But one of the things that we do is that we need is the ability to aggregate the wireless traffic, because 52% of all calls, if you that's from a CTIA statistic, originate on a wireless network, either cellular or some kind of Wi-Fi. All of them traverse a fiber network. So we are a big believer in getting more robust fiber networks. We also believe that the individual counties over the years have been treated very differently, and that every county deserves their own middle mile ring. And again, there are counties that have multiple middle mile rings. Vernon is a good example. I think Vernon must have 5 rings. I mean, you have to have like 6 fiber cuts before you would lose service in Vernon County. That's robust. That's a good job. On the other hand, if you're up in Rhinelander and that one string gets cut, you're dead in the water, sometimes for days. If you're in the town of Morrison in Brown County and somebody cuts where they're getting their DSL, and 2 weeks later they can't find a technician to go out to fix it, you know, you start screaming at the county about the lack of 911 access. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons. So we look at it as 5-pronged approach. And we've been, you know, very public about this and very transparent about it. Number 1, we need to get service out right away with fixed wireless. And there's going to be that home in the trees you can't get. And then we're going to try to put a 30-foot wood pole up, and we're going to get the electric utility out there. We're going to put it on top of a silo, and our installers are now trained to climb silos. In some cases, it's less expensive to build a 110-foot harvester silo than get fiber to that home. So, you know, there are a lot of interesting things that are being done to get service. Number 2, we connect those with the middle mile, and we get significant community input on a comprehensive plan where we're saying, where does the county need service? August, where's your 911 towers? August, where's your landfill? August, where's your school systems? August, you know, and he provides all of that information, and all of the counties are really open with that because they've been getting beat up for years on getting adequate facilities. Kewaunee County, there was a guy waiting when we turned on the tower because they couldn't use credit cards for the tipping fees at the one of the salvage places in Kewaunee County. Third thing, after we have middle mile, then we use the middle mile to branch off with fiber to the premise. And we'll do it either ourselves in areas that aren't committed for RDOF or that we know somebody else is doing something. The hardest thing is our industry is so trained to not share information because of our competitive nature that we don't want anybody to know what our plans are for fear someone else goes there first. It would be nice if we did have that trust to be able to say, hey, you're doing this, we're doing that, and we're all going to get this done in 18 months instead of in 7 years. We're not quite there yet, but I think we're building bridges. The fourth thing we do is we partner with cellular providers on getting ubiquitous cellular service, and we work with 2 of the big 3, and it's been working out very well for us and for them. We were very involved in the FirstNet deployment, so we've seen cellular service get deployed in our counties. We have programs where the big 3 carrier doesn't even pay us anything. We just put the tower up and give them free service for a period of time. And we've always convinced them that there's enough people there because we know where we're building the towers, there's people there. And if they don't show a ton of dropped calls, they're showing not having dropped calls because there's no service there to show. So people that use the heat maps will say, there's nothing on my heat map. So, and the last thing is our little Bug Tussle University kitschy thing where we teach people about artificial intelligence and we teach people how to use a mouse for the elderly folks and everything in between. And I spent a lot of time there. I just get carried away. Sorry.
Thank you, Steve. You mentioned hollering at the county. No one ever needs to holler at their county. That's never, ever. No, never. Brittany, you had 30 seconds. You wanted to say something?
Sure. I was going to just say, the best thing for Steve at Bug Tussle is to have a great partner on the ground who can negotiate and manage and point to the places. So if there's not a Jessica on the ground, their job becomes 100% harder. And so when we're all good partners at the table, this is going to happen so much faster. And I think that's really important to take home for everyone. How do we employ so much education that we're just the shining star all over the state, that we are so educated on this issue so that we can partner with all of the different providers? And I would say it's essential to have someone at a local area, because it's a management of multiple relationships. And if you don't have somebody negotiating that, again, this takes so much longer. You're going to still have people missed unless you have an August in your back pocket. And really, if we had a system placed all over the state that the checklist was there, the mapping procedural items are all done and checklisted. It gets bumped up to a regional way of seeing things. We're not going to overbuild middle mile. We're not going to miss anyone. It's just a new amount of just structuring that we have to do. We have a golden moment, and we just have to capitalize on it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brittany Beyer of Grow North and Chair of the Governor's Commission on Broadband Access, Jessica Hatch of Dora County, and Steve Schneider of Bug Tussle. Thank you all very much for being on the panel.
Thank you.
And at this point, we're going to turn the program over to Mr. Jeff Mayers, or otherwise known as Mr. WisPolitics. Jeff.
August is due up here. And so I'm not a member of the August fan club, but I hope to be, because he's going to have to live up to all those kudos.
I can't believe I'm up here with August.
Yeah, my God.
What's even the point coming up here?
Wow.
Can you hear me okay with this microphone? Is that okay?
Yeah, if you eat the eat the microphone.
Yeah,
that's our
Good.
advice.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I'm Jeff Mayers from WisPolitics.com and WisBusiness.com. WisBusiness is a partner of the series of events that Jim Wood and Mark O'Connell have been putting together. Going into depth on all these important issues for competitive Wisconsin. We're very happy to be part of that. Also want to thank Mark for setting a very high bar for the moderating duties. I'll do my best to keep up with him. We're running a little bit behind, so we're going to use this session to catch up a bit. So I ask people to keep their questions short and to the point here. And there's going to be some numbers that we're going to go after. So let's start. I want to introduce our two panelists. Rory Tukalski. He's the Broadband Expansion Manager for the PSC. And we have, of course, August Neverman, the Broadband Director for Brown County. Come on, let's hear it.
All right, thank you.
All right, but I think we're going to go first with you, Rory, to give us a breakdown of all the funding that is available. I think it's an unprecedented amount of funding. And so why don't we get to that? Give us a little briefing on that. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Can you hear me okay? Is this microphone better? Better? Good. Thanks. So welcome. Thank you for having me here. And thanks to all of our providers, to New North for putting this on. You know, it's a real pleasure as part of the Broadband office to join you all here today, because you are pulling all the pieces together in a way that we hope we can upscale to the entire state. So you're a model. Thank you. And thank you for being a good partner as well. So I just want to say I'm Rory Tukalski. I'm from the Wisconsin Broadband Office. I'm a little bit new to the Broadband Office. I've been there about 5 or 6 months, and I manage the Broadband Office as a whole. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with Jerry McCollum. He's also here today. He just stepped out, but he's our Strategic Initiatives Coordinator. He manages a lot of our outreach, our stakeholder engagement. So certainly been a member and a good partner with all of you so far. So thank you for having me and having the team here today. So I'll give a brief overview, the Wisconsin Broadband Office overall, and then I could spend my whole week talking about all the funding opportunities, all the ways we're going to try and help bolster the efforts that have started here in this region and move forward to having full connectivity for everyone. So first and foremost, we've got slides up here on the screen. What is the Wisconsin Broadband Office? Well, we're really interested in getting affordable broadband service to everyone in our state and giving them the tools and capability that they can, equitably share in those benefits. So that's everything from connectivity to the household, connectivity of regions through middle mile, but also making sure folks have the skills that they need. If you aren't familiar with computers or don't have the right devices, making sure you have all those pieces together. So at the end of this process, hopefully soon, our mission and our vision is that everyone will have access to that technology and know how to use it. So can you pop to the next slide for me? So briefly, the Wisconsin Broadband Office, we try and do everything, and we get stretched very thin doing so. But these are kind of our big five. Number one, leadership and vision. We hope to provide leadership and coordination with broadband policy, kind of act as a bridge between Wisconsin and the federal government, federal funding opportunities, and also try and develop kind of a comprehensive plan for our state in building out broadband. Number two, data and maps. And, I can just hand this right over to August. He can tell you all about it. But our GIS team works day in, day out with August, and our plan is to fill those gaps in our data and our mapping strategy. We know there's lots of problems with our data in Wisconsin and nationwide on where broadband is and where we need it. So we're working really hard on that, and we can certainly talk more about that. August will definitely talk more about that. Number three, and this is a big one for us in recent years, strategic investment in infrastructure. We have already, at the state level, made an investment of $300 million for broadband access in Wisconsin, and that's infrastructure, that's middle mile, that's to the home, and that's everything in between. So we're making those investments, and we're also working to leverage federal dollars and make sure those are allocated in an efficient, accountable way. So that's a big component of our strategy in prior years, and we're lucky to say we have a lot of expertise in that we've cultivated going forward. Number four, digital equity and inclusion framework. This is a newer component, a component we're working on upskilling, and we certainly would love to hear your comments and your involvement here. But we're focused on trying to find ways to make sure when we're doing our planning for broadband build-out, we are bringing in every corner of our state and making sure folks who haven't been involved in that planning process until now are involved. Because one of the reasons why everyone in Wisconsin doesn't have access is we haven't heard every voice calling, please help us. So we want to make sure we bring in every corner of that state when we're doing that. And finally, five, I think this is the most important one, and I think this is, today is a perfect example of what can be done when you do that, and that's partnership and capacity building. We're working with our local governments, our providers, our community development organizations, nonprofits, schools, everyone in that broadband ecosystem we are working with to develop that strategy, to communicate those needs, to understand, what works best for every locality, every, individual neighborhood, city, village, town, rural area, wherever, so that we can build it the way that makes sense for your community. So, that's going to be a big component of what we're doing in the next year. And with that, I think I'll jump into our funding. And I think, next slide for me? Thank you. So my big focus here today is talking about funding. So we heard in the first couple panels, especially in the New North here, there's been a lot of planning, a lot of outreach, a lot of coordination, but the next step, I think, is funding. And what happens once you have a plan? Where do you go with it? So I'm going to talk through most of these programs here. There's just a deluge of funding from the federal government under the bipartisan infrastructure law for broadband, and that comes in a lot of different forms, attacking a lot of different angles of the problem. It's $65 billion, and I'll kind of talk you through each of those components as we go here. So first and foremost, next slide, please. I'm going to talk about BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. This is the bread and butter of what we've been talking about. This is our large infrastructure program. The federal government is investing $40 billion, and it's going to be coming through states. So the way it'll work is Wisconsin will get an allocation from the federal government, and then we will work very similar to our existing grant program to allocate that money to projects and areas in need and make sure that we can get access to everyone. This slide, I'm stealing these slides from NTIA, which is our cohort agency at the federal level, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so thank you and credit to them. But there's a lot on here, and I'm sure we'll make sure these slides are available if you want to study them more. But I'll just briefly talk through one thing here for BEAD. Is the timeline, I think, is really important, and everyone's anxious to get going. But I just want to talk you through, what needs to get done for us to build that infrastructure and where we are right now. So it's a little small, but I think I would say, first and foremost, the funding was announced as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law last fall, and since that time, we've been working and planning with NTIA and the U.S. Department of Commerce to develop a planning process and understand what allocation of funding will look like in Wisconsin. So just last week, I can happily say we successfully submitted our application for our state's portion of BEAD funding. We're hopeful, and there's some variables there, but we're hopeful that Wisconsin will get around $1 billion to allocate for broadband infrastructure development. So right now, we submitted an application for planning. Once it's approved, we'll spend about 9 months planning and working with New North and other economic development partners, local communities, local municipalities, counties, to develop a strategy, get good data, understand the needs and wants of communities, and find out what works best in the most accountable, efficient, and expeditious way. So we're going to spend the next 9 months or so, 10 months or so, developing a plan. Once that plan's in place, we will submit it to the federal government. They'll review it for, make sure we're hitting all the things we need to, and then we'll start with the process where we'll start developing our program to allocate funding. And that can be about a 4 or 5 year implementation. We'll be giving out grants to serve locations and working with all the providers and local partners to actually build that infrastructure and put it in the ground. So that's BEAD at a very high level, but I can keep going. You want to go to the next slide, please? So taking a step back before I drown you in timelines, BEAD is focused first and foremost on infrastructure deployment. And right here, we've got 3 ranked categories here. This is the prioritization criteria that the federal government has given us in how we allocate our BEAD funding. So first and foremost, we are going to be identifying and serving locations in Wisconsin, every physical address that lacks service to 25/3 service. And part of that strategy is going to be identifying those locations, but first and foremost, we're going to be serving 25/3. If funding allows, and this is an open question, we'll move our way down the list, providing service to folks who lack 100 by 20, and eventually making sure any community anchor institutions are getting their gigabit connections. So next slide, please. That's the big picture, but what are we doing right now? Well, right now we're in our planning phase, and a big component of our planning phase is working with our data and working with our maps. And August is a great partner and a great collaborator on that effort, but working to develop an understanding of where that service is and where it needs to be. First and foremost, I should step back. The BEAD program, the allocation of funding, that $1 billion that Wisconsin is planning on getting, is going to be based on a determination by the Federal Communications Commission. That's kind of our federal agency counterpart at PSC. They're conducting a nationwide effort to develop a location-based map of broadband service. We've talked about a little bit earlier this morning. Traditionally, the best we had for a map of broadband service is at the census tract level, and it's not good enough. If one house in that census tract has service, then we call that area served, and there are folks who are left out. So we're upgrading our data strategy. We're getting a location by location, address by address map of whether or not we have service. And once we have that map, Wisconsin's going to get its proportional amount of all the unserved locations in the state, in the country, and that we hope will be about $1 billion. It could be a little more, it could be a little less. But once that's approved by FCC, we'll move forward in actually allocating that money. But before we do, alongside our data strategy, we're conducting a 9-month, 10-month long planning process here. You'll see up here the number $5 million. That's the amount of money the federal government has given us, or will be giving us once our application is hopefully approved in the near future here, to conduct a planning process. And there's a bunch of bullet points up here of all the things we want to do in our planning process. I could talk for days about each of these, but I think some of the really big ones we already talked about. Data collection is a huge component. Doing outreach and publications, holding events, holding events like this, to educate folks on what we're doing, but also to hear from communities about what they need, meeting with county administrators and providers and looking for partnerships and ways we can work together to find the most efficient, cost-effective, accountable, build-out and expeditious build-out of broadband. So, in our planning process, we're going to be doing all of these things, and certainly alongside that, and we heard about this too, finding ways to provide toolkits and skills and seminars and capacity to our local units of government, to our Jessicas, to our county administrators, to all of our different members and stakeholders, so that they feel comfortable and empowered to step up and say, we need broadband in our community and we know how to get started. So, all of those will be components of our strategy, our 5-year of a 5-year plan that we'll put together. And once we have that 5-year plan finalized, we'll start building it and implementing it. So next slide, please. So, most of all, and this slide is a great representation of all the different ways that we're going to be doing outreach, and we would love to hear from you. We will keep pestering you these next 9 and 10 months until we hear from you. We want to work with you and know what you need and how you want to plan your broadband. So, we're going to be looking for geographic coverage. We're going to be looking for, a broad set of stakeholders, not just providers, not just counties, but, communities and, schools and libraries and all these different, users of the internet and, our workforce, our private sector partners, our businesses who depend on good broadband. We're going to be talking to all these different stakeholder groups and bringing them together to make sure that we have a really complex, robust plan that's comprehensive. So that's local coordination. That's BEAD. Next slide, please. Once we do all that, we'll have our 5-year plan, and you can read these slides later, but these are all the things that we have to make sure we cover in our 5-year plan, and there's a mountain of them. So we're working to pull all those pieces together so that it can make sure that we have a plan that works and is efficient for everyone. So next slide, please. Thank you. So, taking a step back, that's BEAD. That's our infrastructure deployment program. That's the bread and butter of a lot of our broadband efforts. This is another way to look at our timeline. Right now, if you look up there, we're in kind of the planning phase. We are working with our federal partner, U.S. Department of Commerce, NTIA, to get our application for planning funds approved. And hopefully, we don't know the exact timeline, but hopefully maybe by October, we will get that $5 million of planning funds, and then we will hit the ground running to do that outreach, build those toolkits, get that data strategy, do all those components of our BEAD strategy so that we can be ready to go in spring, next summer, when we start talking about actually allocating that infrastructure dollars. So that's BEAD. That's our biggest component. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk a little bit about some of the other components of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Digital Equity Act is an interesting component. It's a little bit different than a lot of the traditional broadband efforts we've been up to at the Public Service Commission, but it's a new frontier, and we're hopeful that we can engage and leverage this federal funding to fill out our broadband plan. So broadly, Digital Equity Act is going to be a very parallel timeline to the BEAD program. We're going to be doing some planning these next 9 months to 1 year, and once we're done with our planning, we're going to start implementing. It's a smaller pot of money nationwide. It's about $3 billion. So there's a couple components there. You want to hop to the next slide, please? But before we get into all those components, let's talk about what digital equity is. This is the definition that the federal government has given us about digital equity. It's about ensuring individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that's needed for full participation in the society and economy of the United States. And I don't think I need to explain to a single person in this room how important it is to have both the technology and the skills to connect to the internet and the value that that provides. So, next slide, please. Digital equity is all about connecting and finding ways to make sure that when we make our plan for our infrastructure deployment, we're hitting every corner of Wisconsin and every community in Wisconsin and finding their needs. Because one of the reasons why we haven't completed our puzzle yet for broadband is because we haven't heard from everyone. So we want to make sure we're hearing from low-income households, rural households, aging households, communities of color, those with language barriers, English second language, veterans, all of these different constituent groups need broadband sometimes more than others. And we want to make sure we're hearing their needs and designing a strategy that fits them as well. So next slide, please. Digital Equity Act is going to be broken up very similar to BEAD in kind of a step-by-step process. So right now, just last month, Wisconsin Public Service Commission submitted an application to the federal government to start a planning process. And we're going to see about $1 million through this planning process to do outreach to all those communities and make sure we're filling out our broadband plan. And alongside our BEAD planning, really integrating those two. That's going to be a process that we expect will start coming September, which, I don't know if you noticed, but summer's almost over. Time is flying. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to get started with that. And that will go through about the end of next summer. And that'll be a year-long process. Once that process is done, the state will be eligible to compete for about $1.5 billion of funding to implement our digital equity plan, start that outreach and engagement and upskilling of those communities. And we expect, it's hard to say exactly the amount, but we expect probably about $25 million for those efforts over kind of a 5-year implementation period. Alongside that, the state will be doing a lot of work, but we'll also be looking to local communities, partners of all shapes and sizes, libraries, schools, et cetera, to do some of this digital equity work themselves. When I think about upskilling in computer classes, I think about, when I was in school learning to type, or, when I go to the library and I can get help accessing the internet. So working with those institutions to leverage their capacity, the federal government will be giving out about $1.25 billion for, our non-state partners to implement and work through some of those efforts. Next slide, please. So, I could go on, and I'll just flip right through this slide to the next slide, but there's a lot of different groups and a lot of different entities that we need to be involved with when we're doing our digital equity program. So I'll leave those up there, and you can peruse them later. Next slide, please. Once we're done with our digital equity planning, there's like a 20-point list here, again, of all the components we need to pull together to get that done. So please feel free to read up on these later, but it's all about making sure that we have a plan that fills out all the different pieces of Wisconsin. So we're building an efficient, accountable, and plan that fits everyone. So next slide, please, and then you can skip again. So that's kind of Digital Equity Act, where we are right now. Just as a recap, we're in that planning phase. We're hopeful in the next week or two we'll get our about $1 million to start that process, and we'll be pestering you. You'll be hearing from us. We want to hear what you think and what your engagement and partnership can look like through our digital equity process. So after that's done, we'll start implementing that plan, kind of like the BEAD, and that's probably starting next summer, next fall. So that's it for digital equity. You want to slide forward for me? So I'll talk again now, and I think this is extremely relevant based on the discussion we heard this morning about the Middle Mile program. This is also funded through the infrastructure law, and it's about $1 billion. I will say BEAD will also be funding Middle Mile infrastructure, but enabling Middle Mile is specifically targeting those areas of highest need for Middle Mile infrastructure. It's going to be $1 billion. It's a competitive program administered by the federal government, and applications are due September 30th. So if you're in the crowd and thinking about this, let's talk soon, because we want to make sure your application is full and robust and competitive, because it's going to be a nationally competitive program. If we divide $1 billion out, proportionally, Wisconsin could maybe expect about $20 million of investment, but unless we have good competitive proposals, we might not get any. So in terms of the state's involvement in Middle Mile, we are not quite as involved. Middle Mile is going to be a competitive application with the federal government, and it can be any sort of entity. You want to flip to the next slide for me? Local governments, states, but most importantly, industry, providers, consortiums of providers will be our route for accessing Middle Mile funding. The eligible uses are pretty obvious here. It's about building Middle Mile in unserved areas that need that extra access. So next slide, please. In terms of where the state's involved with Middle Mile, we are interested in supporting and helping you understand the requirements and fill out your application and submit it and make sure it's robust and competitive. So when we're talking about Middle Mile in Wisconsin, through this application process, there is a requirement when you're applying that you demonstrate you have coordinated and consulted with the state broadband office. and make sure that you're consistent with our broadband plan and our priorities and our strategy that we've been developing. So if you're thinking about working on a middle mile project, we want to support you. We want to help you build we want you to have a competitive application, and we'd like to hear from you, because unless you have our letter of support, I think my understanding is the federal government is not going to consider your application. So,
Rory, why don't you tell people, though, how they can access this information and how they can get a hold of you? What's the best way to get a hold of the office?
Sure, absolutely. You know, if you're a middle mile provider, you're interested in applying for middle mile grant with the federal government, we have information on our website about a lot of this information. I'm sure we'll be distributing these slides as well. My contact information is on a final slide here, but pull me aside. I'm here all day. Pull me aside. Let's talk. You can have my card. We can talk about middle mile. We can talk about your project, and we can try and help you understand the requirements and how you can make your application competitive. So,
all right. Well, thank you. I mean, so the website is psc.wi.gov, and Rory's email is up there on the screen, and I'm sure these slides will be distributed. And are they at the website too?
The slides are not on our website, but I'm sure Barb will send them around. If I may, one more thing, Jeff, I'd like to talk. Our representative from the Menominee Indian tribe was not able to make it here today, so I just want to talk briefly about some of the funding for our tribal governments and our tribal areas in Wisconsin. Also under the infrastructure law, there is about $2 billion of funding targeted directly at those tribal locations, and Wisconsin has worked hard in the past with our state funding to reach those tribal areas, but we now have another tool in our toolkit to fund tribal governments in tribal areas. So if you're a tribal representative in this room, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you and make sure we can make that connection. A lot of these resources are tribal specific and there's different requirements, but the federal government is working hard to meet the needs of tribal areas in Wisconsin. So let's connect afterwards. There's about $2 billion in federal funding that's coming down the pipeline. You are very already aware of that, but I want to help you apply and understand those requirements. So let's connect afterwards. And I will say the last thing I will say about tribal areas is they're also involved in our digital equity efforts. We're aware of 7 tribes that have applied for digital equity funding directly with the federal government. A number of those are in the New North area in Wisconsin. The Ho-Chunk Nation, the Forest County Potawatomi community, the Menominee tribe, the Oneida Nation, among others, are involved in the digital equity planning process. So we're proud that our tribes are stepping up and being involved, and we love to support them as well. So thank you for the time, Jeff, and I hope I didn't go on too long. I could talk all day about this stuff.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, Rory. All right, that's Rory Tukalski. He's the Broadband Expansion Manager at PSC. All right, this funding is extraordinary, August. I mean, I don't think we've ever had this amount of money come through the pipeline like this. What's it mean for Brown County? You're not going to get $1 billion, but you're going to get a big chunk of it. I mean, what's it mean for Brown County?
We've partnered with some folks here already and haven't been terribly successful, unfortunately. But for Brown County and really the region, and I think the state, this is an opportunity. But I would actually say, even with the unprecedented amount of money we've got here, think of this as a long-term thing. I appreciate all the positive comments. I'm honored to be able to be a conduit for information for all of you. So I appreciate that. A lot of what I'm sharing is from you to you, from providers back to local government. But I guess my answer to the big money is plan. You think that word over and over and over. You have to plan. If you have a plan with maps alone make a huge difference. Because even if they're wrong, and I'm not going to pick a side, but the middle mile map, it created discussion. It got people in the room, and it has already solved some problems. So if you have a map and you have people and you know where they are, and I can share that with Spectrum, or I can share it with US Cellular, or I can share it with AT&T or Ensight or Bug Tussle, whoever it is, I'm going to share it with everybody. If you have that map, you make that puzzle, and you pull out the pieces that are already served, now the puzzle gets not quite so bad. And now you pull out the big areas, like TDS is putting in a huge amount of fiber in the Green Bay area. So the Green Bay Metro, that piece of the puzzle comes out. But the rest of Brown County still isn't done. And for sure, the rest of the region is not done. So Troy had asked me to come and represent him here. So I'm just going to say really quick, as much as we're a success to some extent, it's not an overnight success. That's since 2009 we've been working on this to prepare, not just for this money, but for internal investment. We have almost 220 miles of fiber in the ground. None of that was through these grants. That was all individual installs that made financial sense, that solved a specific problem. If you have a map, you can solve a specific problem. If you just come to pick a provider in the room or not in the room, and you say, I got people who don't have service, fix it. They're going to nod at you and say, okay, what? Where? Who? What's the street address? So what they were talking about with the maps, the location-based maps are a huge deal. And think about this too. If you're investing in those maps to get the location-based data down right, you're solving 911 problems. You're solving zoning. You're solving business parks, school district stuff, fill in the blank. So this isn't, as much as it's unprecedented amounts of money, if you have the planning done, it makes it easier for a provider. It makes it easier for us to talk to local government. If Barb hadn't done their thing, if Brittany hadn't done her thing, I wouldn't be here. So this is a plan, and it's local and state, and those plans feed each other. So if you can get your data set better, and you can hand it to the state, and yeah, we might not match up 100%. I want them to do business parks too. Maybe they can't. But if I have it, and all of you have it, and we can give it to them easy, that makes their life easier, and it's possible that now all of a sudden we got a statewide business park map. And I'm oversimplifying in saying that, but think about that. Really what we're talking about is building roads. Do you have a plan for your roads? Yes. Is every road 8 lanes? No. But I know where my roads are. I know where my developments are. I know where my needs are. Do you have that same data so that you can apply for the federal grants, the state grants, invest your own money, persuade Insight or Spectrum or TDS or whoever to come into your community because their data says, well, that's only 6 houses. No, there's 100 in there. Here's the map. Make it easy for providers. Make it easy up and down. That's something government can do. So I'll stop right there.
No. Okay, and I want to keep this on the money and what it will mean. So if everybody has their planning in order, which is essential, and here comes this money through the state and the feds, so is that going to shorten this 5 to 10 year timeline? I mean, because when I first heard that, after all these years of talking about broadband and grants and everything, I thought, wow, we're still 5 to 10 years away. Is that going to shorten the timeline?
So I can't speak on behalf of the providers, but I can tell you personal opinion. Personal opinion is this overnight success in Brown County started in 2009. 22 miles of fiber since 2009. We need $100 million worth of fiber in Brown County if we're going to go to every house, $200 million, depending on who's doing the install. If I'm installing it, it's $300 million. If a provider's installing it, it's probably $100 million.
So it speeds it up, it doesn't solve it.
No, and the other problem is, am I going to get $100 million of the state's money? I want to.
Rory, can you guarantee that now?
I love to pick favorites, and August is a favorite of ours. But, I think to answer your question specifically, as a condition of our planning process, we're going to spend 9 months and a year planning for broadband deployment through the BEAD program. As a condition of getting our money from the federal government, we have to present them with a plan that gets everyone in our state connected to at least who lacks access to 25 by 3. We need to promise to get all of them connected by 2028. And that's the 5-year implementation plan.
Yep.
That's the structure the federal government has given us, and we're doing everything in our capacity with our resources, with our partners, to develop a plan to meet that goal. And I think this problem predates me and predates a lot of us, but I think the investment here is now so substantial, we have the means to do it. It's just a matter of coordinating and finding partnerships to pull it off. So I hate to be the next one to make a promise, but I think we can do it, and I think this Wisconsin in particular, relative to a lot of states I've spoken to, has the infrastructure, has the capacity, has the motivation to do it. So 5 years, I think it could even be less.
Okay.
So I'm just going to pile on that a little bit. I'm not quite as optimistic. And if I have a map, I can be realistic. I am optimistic. I mean, we're going to work the state, the folks at PSC, Jared and Coulter and yourself, they're working to help us out. But we have to help too. But those maps also help us solve, okay, I'm going to get half the money I wanted. Now what? What do I do? If I've prioritized internally, I can actually get stuff done. And you can't really, as much as the folks who did the Design 9, they did a great job. But they didn't get down to that detail level of designing internally. That's what I can tell every one of you, all of you online. You got to design. You have to know what your priorities are. Are you going to target subdivisions? Are you going to target stuff near the middle mile? And when I say, I hear all the definitions of middle mile. I go back to roads. It's just a bunch of roads, and can I get on them or not? Are they private roads or public roads? And am I going to pay a lot to get on them or not? Some places I was paying 23 times the price of putting fiber in the ground. Other places it was way cheaper to lease. Now let me re-explain that. In some cases it was 23 times cheaper for me to put my own fiber in the ground than lease it. In another spot, in fact, one of them's with Ensight, who's in the room. It was 3 times cheaper to lease it. Well, guess which one the county picked? 3 times cheaper. So the county doesn't have to be at odds with utilities if that's the perception. But the county is going to try to save money, and I'm speaking on behalf of Brown. I won't talk to anybody else, but I'll bet nickels to dollars everybody else is going to be saying, how can I save money? So if we can save money and help the utility and solve the last mile question, because that's ultimately what this gets down to. Middle mile doesn't really count. Yeah, it counts to me because I got to get 911 towers and election connections and all that kind of junk. But once I got that ring made, now how can I take care of Morrison? How can I take care of Eaton, Humboldt, all those townships? And if I have that plan, I don't know where the money's coming from, but I got a rough plan. Now I can talk to providers. Ensight, Bug Tussle, Spectrum, especially if they show up. Well, I'm just being blunt. But another way to get them in the room is, again, have the map. So I know I'm harping on maps. I'm turned into a map geek because of this. But the cash correlates. If I want to qualify for the money, I have to be able to prove I have unserved or underserved. A map. I have to be able to identify my anchor institutions. A map. If I want to get a partner who's going to spend money on this, they're going to want to know, okay, how much is it a passing? If the county does it, it's $28,000 a passing. If I do it, it's $14,000 a passing. My break even is $3,500 a passing. I got a problem. How many people are along that road? Does the math work? Does it not work? So this is a problem up and down. So that unprecedented pile of cash out in the cloud, it's got like a screen or a filter in between. And not all the money's coming through. The better your map, the more the money comes through.
Okay.
August couldn't have said it. I couldn't have said it better myself. August, I think, really emphasizes the commission's position as well. We have lots of great partnerships with providers who voluntarily share data with us about their service areas, and they do it on a very granular level. We love those partnerships. We want to grow them, and that's only one part of our data strategy. So the funding only comes if we have good maps. So please reach out. Let's talk.
All right, well, so let's go right into the next panel. Thank you very much, Rory. Your colleague is going to join us now. Come on up. Let's hear it for Rory. Now we're going to move on to making it work in your backyard with Jared McCallum. He's Strategic Initiatives Coordinator at PSC. Bob Webb, he's VP of Innovative Operations at Insight Teleservices. August, of course, is staying on. Steve Schneider is back from Bug Tussle Wireless. And Jim Wood from Wood Communications is joining us. All right, here we are. Making it work in your backyard. Does anybody here not have, speaking of our backyards, does anybody here not have good internet? What? You don't have good internet in your backyard?
No, in fact.
Speaking to your mic.
No, that's another reason why I'm a little bit more passionate. My wife runs an online business, and we offered to our local providers, and I won't say who, but they're not in the room either. We offered $20,000 up front to get hooked up, and never got a call back. And I've called them probably every quarter for 15 years.
Okay, Bug Tussle will be at your house soon.
I've gotten service from him, but my main challenge is we're running an online business. So whoever was talking about needing 2 connections, I could really use a left fiber and a right fiber, because she gets 500,000 to 1 million people visiting her a month.
Fiber's coming.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I'm just saying, we've felt the pain.
Okay, I think that is the thing in Wisconsin, right? I mean, you can have the variance of service within a few miles of your residence to somebody or somebody down the street even. And I think that's when I think one of the complications is the frustration I hear is why is it taking so long? What's the answer to that? First off, why don't you start with Steve? Why is this taking so long?
Limited resources is probably number one, and number two is the decision-making process takes a long time, not just from a private industry, and some counties move faster than others. So, there are counties where we're well along, like Kewanee, and Insight's doing things in Kewanee, and we are, and Charter is, and so everybody, but they had a committee years ago, before the pandemic. They had a committee. A lot of the counties that had plans going on back in 2016 or 18, some as far back as 2012, are really ahead of the game. There's still counties that are forming a broadband committee at this point. So that has a huge impact. And, right now there's supply chain issues too. And it affects all of us. And so that, continues to be a hurdle.
All right, let's go to Jim Wood.
I asked Jeff if I could just say a word at the front end of this, because it is called In Your Backyard. And one of the points I wanted to make on this panel is that it behooves us to listen to what everybody's saying about how important this is, because it's true. We are talking about the future of our economy, the capacity to build an opportunity economy that is really open and accessible to everybody, all of which affects our capacity to keep and retain employers and get jobs and educate people and keep them healthy, et cetera. But in the mix of that, every now and then, you have to take a look at how it's fallen out. And it's fallen out so that money is coming to locally elected officials. Okay? Those folks have to make decisions. This process, and I've loved what's happened here before, because part of the magic in what we do is we all of this is being videotaped. We will edit it and we will put it online and we will get it to lots and lots of people, because it is like drinking from a damn fire hydrant. I mean, so you got to think about the folks at the county boards and the town boards and the constituents who are trying to figure out what the heck's going on and so on and so forth. And I say all of that because part of the process has to be, we talk about education, but we're really talking about persuasion and priorities, okay? Education is I try to teach you everything I know, okay? Elected officials in the time frames that have been put on the table can't absorb all of this. Persuasion is about telling people what they need to know so that they can make the decisions that they've been elected or appointed to fulfill their responsibilities. Everybody needs an August Neverman, okay, who can put the questions and frame things, information, into decisional action items, okay? And this panel, this session, was hoped to provide an opportunity for people who are elected officials or advise elected officials to ask some questions, because I think we need to hear what they're asking. So I think all of us ought to make some, you notice how brief I am, should make some brief opening statements, but then let's hear what questions they've got based upon this flood of information that's come down the path at them. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Bob Webb now from Insights Teleservices. Bob, what's taking so long, and what's the solution?
Well,
speaking to your mic.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. Insight's been providing communication services for 112 years now in the New North. We've been doing it for that long. It doesn't have to always take a long time. So let me give you some examples really quickly. Insight's focus is on partnering directly with villages and towns. That's our focus. We think that's the right level of engagement. We signed a fiber project agreement in February of 2021 with the village of Luxembourg, about 1,200 households. As of June 30th of this year, everybody in that village has access to fiber to the home. Minimum speeds are 300 megabits per second up and 300 megabits per second down. So it can be done, but I do admit there are now supply chain issues, labor shortage issues, maybe stretch that out. But when you work and engaged at the right level, you can move quickly. And so we're engaged directly with the village of Casco, directly with the village of Luxembourg, with the towns of Bailey's Harbor and Liberty Grove, and we hope to continue to focus at that level and really deliver what we're here talking about, which is not infrastructure. What we're really talking about is broadband to the home, and that's what we're delivering.
Okay. Jaron, what's your view on what has taken so long, and what are the solutions, and how can PSC help?
Sure. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here. It's really exciting to be in this room, and all the familiar faces and unfamiliar faces get to meet some new folks. But I'm Jaron. I'm with the Public Service Commission, the Wisconsin Broadband Office. I've been there for almost 7 years now in various roles. But a lot of what I've done over my many hats that I've worn is working with internet service providers, working with communities, working with stakeholders across the state to find solutions to connect folks. I think that's what we're all after. But I had some slides, but I can probably just go without. But I thought it would be useful to highlight a case study. It was highlighted in the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access, but there's a community called the Town of Cross. It's in Buffalo County. It's on the Mississippi River. I thought it would be useful just to highlight some things that they did, because I thought that they were a kind of a shining example. I worked with them pretty closely. They had a strong public-private partnership. They worked with the local provider, Cochrane Communications Cooperative. They had a partnership with Buffalo County as well, and then the township as well, of course. So they had a number of action steps. I've got them up on the screen there. To me, they look like small font right now, so maybe you'll have to look at that after the fact. But they formed a broadband committee. They got local residents on board. They did a survey of residents. They enacted our Broadband Forward model ordinance and our Telecommuter Forward programs. So they got engaged with some of those certification programs that we have at the PSC. And then also they were fortunate to be selected back in 2020 with partnership with the Wisconsin Economic Development Organization, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, WEDC. PSC had a Broadband Connectors pilot program where we provided technical assistance to 6 communities. We had a lot more apply for that, and it spoke to the need for that technical assistance and local knowledge and expertise. But they were lucky enough to be selected for that, got some one-on-one guidance over the course of 2020, and actually were selected to be approved for a ARPA grant. The Public Service Commission awarded broadband grants leveraging some ARPA funds, and they were selected to receive a grant from that. So they had kind of a lot of, they had a strong public-private partnership. They were selected for that program to really receive some technical assistance, and they got the ARPA grant. So it was really a strong kind of culmination of a lot of different factors. But I think that is a good example to highlight kind of a success story and connecting a rural community that probably wouldn't have received service otherwise. They had a lot of great partners at play. So, why don't I take a pause there?
Okay. August, what's your opinion on what you've heard so far in terms of how long it takes? And again, you stressed the map, but using that example about the partnerships,
Sure.
Maybe you can talk about how important those are in knitting together, so you get your service at your house.
Yep. So I from the time challenge, when I got involved in broadband more heavily and learned from the people in this room, one of the big things I learned was that one is terminology, the whole passings thing. Passings is a business or a home. And the cost per passing is a huge deal. Because if I can't make my revenue match my cost per passing, I'm going to lose money going there. And for a lot of the rural spots, even in Brown County, it's like $14,000 a passing. And that's like a spectrum cost. Mine is probably $28,000 if I do it. Because I'm expensive, just for whatever reason. When we put fiber in the ground, we're about $105,000, $110,000 a mile in the ground. And if I remember correctly, it's about half that for whether, if it's Ensight or Bug Tussle or Spectrum or somebody, might even be less than that. But for whatever reason, it's expensive. There's no magic to it. It costs a ton of money to put the fiber in the ground. So if it's $14,000 to get to my house, and it's more than that, because I'm at the end of the run. I know where my box is. I know where my house is. My box is like 6 miles away. So if I'm building it, it's $600,000. That's why the 20 didn't count. And even if I figure they have a little DSL switch about a mile away, well, then I'm still $100,000, and that's compared to that $20,000. And I'm the only one on the run who wants to pay. So the time challenge is a cash problem. They're almost one-to-one, and I think every provider here who might not agree on everything will agree that if you had enough cash, you could make it happen, right? You could build out everywhere if you had enough cash. For the county, if it's $100 million, you do that times 7 counties. Now do that times 70. We're going to get $1 billion. How's that math work? So that's why I'm a little nervous on this, because you do the math for the state, and I don't know I'm right. I'm not been doing this 20 years. But listening to other people who have been doing it their whole life, I'm pretty sure, because I hear the same message from completely different people. There's a challenge here. And now, how can we make it happen? I think that's the second half of your question. It's this. And then back to that one word I said, plan. I didn't say map. I said plan. Because it's more complicated than the map. In fact, I'm probably, Brown County needs Jessica more than it needs me. I'm good at the maps and all this other stuff. I'm going to be blunt with you. I can't remember names to save my life. You need somebody who's going to be able to remember everybody and keep track of where everything is going and all the balls in the air. Politicians. I'm just being blunt. And you have an opportunity. Everybody, whether you're online or here, you have ARPA money that you can use to pay for a Jessica. Or if you think you want somebody like me who's a map geek, you can pay for somebody like me. But my personal suggestion would be get somebody like Jessica who can keep track of all everything that's going on. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, so just to clarify, so all this money, $1 billion plus, is not enough. I mean, that's just bottom line, right?
So that's a really good question.
Well, go ahead.
Every one of these guys want.
Well, let's hear it from everybody. Yeah.
Just let me. It's going to get us farther than we are today, guaranteed. So I don't want it to sound any way doom and gloom, but I don't know how far down the road. That's these guys. That's why we need them at the table.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
I think Celeste hit it on the head earlier in that each county has to know who's doing what and what it costs. And so, when I heard the $1 billion earlier, I got out my phone quick and calculated. That's $14 million per county. We've done budgets for almost every county and you're talking $100 million or more per county. So basically, if every county gets an equal amount, we're about 86% short in the rural counties and more so in the metro and the bigger counties like a Sheboygan and a Brown. So it has to take RDOF dollars, it has to take private investment, it has to take public investment. Our thing is these bonds are not county money that we're issuing. They're sold on the public market, and we need access to that low-cost money because I don't think there's any providers in here that can access money at the rates that a county can access money or raise sales tax or things like that contribute to the whole plan. So I think it has to be a very coordinated budgeting process that, again, creates that comprehensive plan.
Okay. Bob?
Sure. Every success story we've had so far involves the town or the village also making a significant investment on top of the state dollars. So you're going to need the local municipalities to contribute in order to deliver service where the market can't deliver it on its own.
So the Fed money or the state money is a foundational grant to help, and,
I
right?
would say exactly. It's foundation.
I would also add that specifically with the BEAD funding, there's this $1 billion estimate that Wisconsin might be receiving, give or take. There's also a match component that's a part of that. So there's also other funds that will be, kind of flowing with alongside that. I guess I would say, there's private funds that'll be added. There's maybe some local funds that will be added, and then there's these federal dollars that'll be flowing through the state. So it's potentially a bigger pool than that, especially with the match component that is required in those BEAD grants of 25%. So.
One of the things, it seems to me, God, this is complicated, isn't it? I want to put it as nicely as I can. So I agree that we have to have maps, and my friend Steve knows that I am an absolute believer in the need for comprehensive planning. So you put these pieces together. But we go out and map what is there right now, okay? One of the things that is there right now is that we have between 60 and 70,000 high-demand jobs that are unfilled in this state. Competitive Wisconsin is doing this series of events around the 8 topics the local officials told us needed to be addressed so they could compete for keeping and getting the workers that they need. If we don't get this right, of course, people will not be in a lot of the places that they show up on your current maps. And when you start talking about how you pay back bonds and you start talking about how you make money selling services to customers, if they're not there, none of this works. So part of this has got to be about prioritization. It is important, obviously, to say we have to have an opportunity economy. Obviously, we want to build a system that reaches everybody. But if we are not allowing that farmer in that field that Steve talks about to do precision agriculture quicker than some of these other things, we're out of luck, okay? If we are not concentrating on making sure that rural Wisconsin can in fact begin to repopulate itself, we lose here, okay? And so I think that has to be a piece of the equation as we're talking about the funding, and the sustainability piece is absolutely critical. And so what we do, and I points to everybody because you've talked about a multiple year plan of 3 years, 4 years, 6 years. That is exactly what we need to be doing. We need to help ourselves and local officials understand the reason you do comprehensive planning is so you understand what to do first. Okay? And unless that financial sustainability is on page 1, we can't sustain the pitch, right?
I'd argue it even has to be longer than 7 or 10 years. When we're doing bonds, we need to provide the underwriters with a 30-year plan, and we need to provide the underwriters with 50% of the revenue up front that we have to have contracted. And typically that's not fiber to the home. That's AT&T towers and Verizon towers. And, you know, I think Ensight has a similar model where in rural markets you make money by combining services. You can get away without doing that in an urban area where you have more folks. But in rural markets, you have to have 5 or 6 revenue streams.
Okay. Anybody else want to talk about, piecing together the financing? Any other comments on piecing together the financing before we go out for questions or online for questions? Okay. Let's go to the room first, and then Kenan, if you have any good questions online, you can filter them in. But any comments, questions out there? Okay, sir, in the back in the yellow shirt. Is this a planted question?
He did plan it.
Okay. Yeah, I will. Okay, is there a update on the capital projects fund?
At this point, I don't have one. Rory, I don't know. I'm looking at you right now. At this point, I don't.
Come up
one.
here and talking to the mic.
Maybe Rory's got more to share.
Sure. So Capital Projects Fund is certainly a portion of our strategy going forward, but that funding is dependent on approval by the federal government, and it's kind of an ongoing process. We've applied for the funding, but it's not yet approved, and until we get it approved, we can't begin a process for figuring out how to allocate it. So I hate to say it still, but stay tuned. We need our application approved before we can do more than that.
How does it relate to the $1 billion anticipated?
Sure. So that's on top of the $1 billion. It's a separate program. It's separate funding source.
Okay. I would just also add, I wanted to plug this later or earlier, but we have a newsletter at our Wisconsin Broadband office that I would assume a lot of you already subscribe to, but it's roughly every month, and I cannot emphasize that enough. It is a great newsletter. At least I like to think it is. It's probably a little bit like drinking from a water hose or fire hose, but it is relevant, pertinent information, articles, that sort of thing, but you won't miss anything if you're subscribed to that.
So how do you subscribe to it?
We have it on, there's a hot link on our Wisconsin Broadband Office webpage that you can click on and just type in your name and email. But also just reach out to one of us and we can subscribe you as well. So just wanted to plug that. So if there is a capital projects announcement, you'll be the first to know.
Okay. Other questions out there in the audience? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, the question from a consumer in the audience, does a cable going past your house guarantee service? If not, why not?
So I'll let Steve chime in on this as well after I do. There's a big difference between mainline fiber or long-haul fiber and distribution fiber. So that very well could just be long-haul fiber. It needs to be, not even hooked in. It potentially could feed a distribution fiber network, but it is not specifically a distribution fiber network, so it is not specifically. You should not necessarily be the existence of a mainline fiber near you does not necessarily say you will have service anytime soon.
So seeing is not believing. Okay, what about Steve? What's your...
But you can get excited because I did a little research and TDS is coming past your place. So it's staked out. Yeah. And you know, it's a 50-50. You don't always know.
Yeah, so,
okay.
So I'm just really
Go
quick.
ahead.
The analogy I was giving other people is you know, a huge interstate and there's no off ramps. So you may have an interstate in front of you, or you may have a state highway in front of you. If you have a state highway, it has on and off ramps. But if it's one of those big interstates and you know you got to go 50 miles to get off the highway, that's what they're talking about when they say long haul. That's the really big stuff, and that can be in front of your house, but all it is road noise.
Okay, a question right here, sir. Right here. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, I have to repeat the question. The question is from a Waupaca County official. The map is inadequate or faulty and cannot be used to really give a realistic picture to do the right planning, produce the right map. What should he do in the meantime?
Sure. I'll give you an example with the town of Bailey's Harbor. They did a well-formed technology committee. They not only leveraged surveys, they went on provider websites and did speed tests. You know, so you can go on a Frontier or an AT&T website and say I'm at this address and what is the maximum speed I can get, and you can chart and plat really over your PSC broadband map what you're actually experiencing. And I'll turn it over to Jim, but the PSC has said that's a valid map then.
Yeah, so I just want to be full clarity. Like, we understand the deficiencies with our mapping data and our current mapping products, and as you mentioned, it doesn't all come from us. We are leveraging FCC 477 data, and when they have their new broadband data collection data, we'll be leveraging that as well. And we do work with providers to get data directly, and oftentimes in a more granular basis than the census block, which is kind of what we're all after. But I would say a couple of things. Working with internet service providers in your community, to work with them, when I'm working with communities, I often say just talk to your providers, talk to your providers, talk to your providers. And that's obviously one step, but oftentimes they know the best as to where they can serve and where they cannot serve. And depending on how kind of what relationship you have with that provider, they may be willing to just share, you know, this is where we can serve, this is where we can't serve, and this is where we might be going in 5, 10, you know, at whatever timeline that they're interested in. So talking with providers, then also we at the Public Service Commission have a speed test tool that I know Door County is leveraging called Wiser. That it's actually quite a comprehensive survey that you can distribute, and you can work with Coulter. I know that they've kind of had a nice push in Door County, but it can include a speed test using Ookla, and it can, you know, a lot of different data about, you know, costs and what provider you have and what kind of experiences you're using. So there are ways to kind of augment or enhance the currently available data, but I certainly feel the pain of, you know, we need this data, but the currently publicly available data is lacking. And so it's just kind of leveraging those other resources to put together as clear of a picture as you can. So when you're pursuing grants or funding, you can put together that case as to what folks are experiencing on the ground, because that's what ultimately is most important. So,
all right, Kenan, do we have any questions? Go ahead, read them off.
Is there any interest from rural electric companies in serving their customers with internet? Sure.
Go ahead. Who wants to answer that one?
Yeah, the question was, is there any interest in rural electric cooperatives providing internet service? And just from my surveys alone, the answer is clearly yes. There are definitely cooperatives and some that are quite creative, especially in the northwestern part of the state,
Right.
and western part of the state.
Right. The cooperative model is used in a variety of ways in northwestern Wisconsin. So go ahead, Bob.
Ensight Cellcom has partnered with Washington Island Electric Co-op on a couple of grants through the PSC, and that co-op will be delivering internet service this fall to a significant portion of the island. And with continued partnerships and continued work, they will get to the whole island served by the electric co-op.
All right. That's about as isolated as you can get. All right. What's another question? Okay, so you're in an area and you want to know, like you did, when's it getting to you? What's the progress? What's the update? How do people find out? What's the best way? Is that a PSC question?
I think it's almost provider by provider. Some are better and some are worse, and we're trying to get better because we get requests from towns saying somebody's digging in our town and we want to know who it is and where they're going. And so, what we're trying to do is basically before the shovel goes in the ground, getting to town officials, because I think that the town officials are an important plan too for like Wapaka County. I think Marathon County did a phenomenal job on having meetings with the different towns units, and the town folks are generally granular enough to be able to say, we get complaints over here and we get complaints over there. We sort of mapped it out. We sat down with your members, Bill, and said, okay, where's Serenity serving? Okay, you got that area covered. Where's Marquette Adams serving? And we sort of blocked those out, and they did their own study underneath that as to where they were headed. And so I think you can create a predictive map. I think that we as an industry have to get better. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, that we as a company need to get better with providing those planning maps. And again, I think there's a little bit of a competitive thing. Do you want your maps to go out to the public or not? And do you want your timelines to go out? I think we're in a state where if you're partnering with the county and you're partnering with the municipalities, I think they have a right to ask you for that information, and you should probably provide it. At least that's our take.
Right, but there's not like a hotline you can call, right?
The one thing I would just add, over the many years of the broadband office existence, the commission has funded a number of projects, hundreds of projects, hundreds of millions of dollars of state and some federal funds. So all that information is public as well. It's on our electronic records filing system, and we're working on creating a more detailed map of where those services have and have not been deployed. But I will say all that information as to where we funded projects is publicly available. So if there was a adjacent project next to, say, a township, it might be something you'd be able to tap into and kind of lead into those kind of services and see if you can copy anything, if an adjacent community has had a successful grant, or if maybe it was in your community and say it's coming in a year or 18 months, that'd be information that you could tap into and find out. That's kind of one of the benefits of the grant program, is it all is out there for public consumption.
So your provider or your local official or ask the PSC. Okay, so there's not a single portal. Okay, any other good questions there, Kenan? All right, go ahead, sir. Here on my left, go ahead. Okay, you have a good map. Now what? Go ahead.
Sure. Yep. So the now what is, and Jessica can speak to this, lots of phone calls. So there's got to be somebody leading it. You got to have a champion who's going to make a whole ton of phone calls. They're going to find the providers in the region who I may be on the corner of Spectrum and TDS and something else right in a corner. So I need to talk to all three of them. So there's no magic answer to what your next step is. I got to find the providers because I need somebody to be able to deliver services or I can't apply for grants. And if I have my data and I can give that data back to a provider, they may just go, we didn't know about that. You're interested in doing that? If you fund the fiber to the location, we'll take care of all the houses because there's a cluster of houses out in the middle of nowhere that might make them money, but the leg kills them. It might be a 10-mile leg, a 5-mile leg, whatever it is. So this is all about local decisions and working with a provider, whichever one it is. You take that map and you're drilling down to that one, that 4 houses or 40 houses or 60 houses in a subdivision, and then working it back out again.
Okay, Bob, you want to add something here?
Yeah, I think so, because I think I tried real hard not to give August any credit while I was up here today. But the August is the first one who hit us with a RFI, a request for information. We are now have been hit with Pittsfield, Neswapi, Jacksonport, Sevastopol, across the board, and they're very, very similar. It's almost as if somebody's coaching them, but it is a good step to really gather information. At the end of the day, there's no commitment on those RFIs, but it's a good way to reach out on those. Celeste, go ahead.
Oh, no.
No, that's it.
No, go ahead, Celeste.
No, I have a comment.
Well, go ahead. Come up here and speak into the mic.
One of the things that we've tried to do is there are counties that we have significant RDOF in. Outagamie is one of them, Brown County. And so what we thought is, the thought process is if we have our crews already in your county and we could identify the remaining addresses that are unserved or underserved, then we could sweep the county. It's similar to how we've been in discussions with Sheboygan. We also were fortunate enough to have significant RDOF in Walworth County. We received an ARPA grant from the state. And so we are essentially, because that has to be done in 2 years, we accelerated our RDOF in Walworth County to get all of it done, which just makes sense so that we're not having to go back. And so those are the discussions we want to have, particularly with the counties that we know we already have to build significant RDOF in, because then those are efforts that we don't need to duplicate if we can identify those addresses outside of what we already have committed to RDOF, and then figure out how we can serve as many people, that are still unserved and underserved, then I think we can accelerate some of that. So you're not waiting multiple years.
I think go ahead, Jaron.
Could I just say one other thing, too? In terms of kind of the next steps that you had mentioned, our office, the Broadband office, is happy to connect local communities, local elected officials with providers that are in the area or maybe kind of adjacent, to help make introductions and, provide that conduit between local communities and providers, because I realize that can be somewhat of a challenging process if you don't know who to reach out to. We can, our office is happy to help facilitate that process. Just please feel free to reach out. That's something I get pretty frequently. So.
All right, we have some more questions out there, I think. Raise your hand and we can call on you.
Jeff, I got one.
Yeah, go ahead.
It says town budgets don't support internet/broadband funding. Any suggestions of what to do?
Some town budgets don't support internet/broadband funding. What should I do? Go ahead, Bob.
Sure. I think, first of all, when you look at it from an individual citizen, we're talking very rural towns now. Let's focus on rural towns. We're talking about individual citizens. I think you have to look at it, again, Bailey's Harbor did a great job looking at the total cost to the individual. Because right now that individual is likely paying for satellite TV at $120 to $150 a month. They're likely keeping landlines around because they don't have good Wi-Fi for cellular over Wi-Fi, and they may not have good reception, and they're paying a significant amount of money for their DSL connection today. So when they add up that entire cost, and they say, what is my household cost to my household once I have fiber? Well, now I'm getting very, very high speeds on that fiber. I'm eligible to get a streaming service, whether it's an Insight streaming service or anybody else's streaming service, for less than half of what that satellite service is. And in whether I need that cell phone, you do, because it's your Cellcom cell phone, of course, and you want to take it with you worldwide. But you'll need your cell phone, but you may not need that landline anymore. And when you look at the individual monthly savings, approaching anywhere from $50 to above $100, then the funding options available to the towns become very tenable if they look at them, that way. There and I think in Bailey's Harbor they're looking at funding options which would be equivalent to $10 to $15 a month per household.
And just to clarify, that's basically you're doing bond funding to support Bug Tussle, Insight, Spectrum, whoever it is, because again you're supplementing the cost because they can't make money on those passings. So you're getting them enough money to be able to make that difference. And talking about the maps really quick again, knowing your RDOF layer tells you who some of the providers are in the area. Looking at the FCC layers tells you who some of the providers are. So your map does actually get you pretty close to this discussion fairly quickly, because I can see Insight's available or Spectrum or both of them are available in that location, AT&T, whoever it is, because I've got those layers.
Right. Now, these towns, some of these towns are so small, they don't have somebody to go, fill out a application or research this stuff, right? I mean, it's so who that's maybe where the counties, the PSC, of course, is a great resource, but maybe that's where the counties could step in for some of the small towns. I don't know. What sort of, go ahead.
And that's what and both of us are doing that, so I'm pointing at Jessica. We're both doing that, and to some extent, the 9 economic regions in New North is doing that by creating data sets that they could just have, it's there. They don't have to do anything. They can read it. So any township, any city, any village, any other county in the state can read those reports and get 80% of the information that they need knowledge-wise. And what I mean is just concepts. The fiber is a highway. Where is it? What's the costs? They get some concept. So there's a lot of free material for those small towns. Plus, if you've got a Jessica or an August in the county, I contract with Pittsfield, and I just go over there once a month for a couple hours.
Right. Our organization did some reporting on the ARPA money, and we asked, various levels of government in Wisconsin about the ARPA money, and a lot of it came back as, well, we'd kind of like to have that money, but we don't know how to access it or how to get it, or it's like it's intimidating, because they just simply don't have the staff, and so I think that anytime other organizations can pitch in and be support staff or bring a bunch of towns together or some adjacent units together, that would certainly be helpful, because that seems to be where a lot of the need is, right? Okay, so we're now going to go to the wrap-up session. So thank you very much, panelists. It's been very good, very good. So Jim, stay here. Mark O'Connell, Barb Lemieux, Adam Payne, and Rory, you are back. You thought you were out of it, but you're back. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around online and here in person. It's been, I think, a really eventful session. So anyway, this is free flowing here. This is meant to wrap up and have final thoughts about what we've learned and where to go from here. So I'm going to let Barb. Why don't you just start off with that? What have we learned, and where should we go from here?
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you again for your attendance here today. I'd like to just go back to where we started, and That is on the New North broadband deployment map and plans that were developed. So each one of our 18 counties, not only was there a very large, very voluminous New North report, each one of our 18 counties received their own, and they were very, very individualized. So all the data that we talked about with New North is available on our website at thenewnorth.com. You can click on broadband. And I think a couple of things where we talked about getting data. We were provided, as a part of this, updates from many of the service providers, the ISPs that are in the room. And they shared with us where their plans are going forward. They might have not have been included in the data because that plan was really a snapshot in time. But you can go to our website and you can find out from the ISPs and look, are they servicing your area? Also, with each one of the 18 counties' individual plans, the service providers were identified in the maps. So we knew we needed to try and get at this data, and we did it by multiple ways. It was mailing paper surveys because we knew if people didn't have access to broadband, it didn't do any good to give them a link on the computer to say, go ahead and complete the survey, right? So they were stamped, they were shoved in the mail, they were received, they were collated. There were the online surveys and the speed test that Barbara talked about. Those speed tests are still up and available. You can pop on our website, you can take the speed test from home, from work, from the gym, from your children's school, and that data is still being collected and analyzed that ISPs are looking at too as to where they're going to put services. So I do want to thank everyone for getting us to the point where we are. Tons of information on the newnorth.com website. I think what I found most intriguing, and by design, we wanted this to be very robust conversations about where we go from here. When we look at those 4 areas of buckets through NTIA, right? The first one was BEAD, and I think Rory and Jaron did a great job of identifying Wisconsin going to get about $1 billion. The rules are not baked yet as to how those funds get deployed. We are seeing already our counties using their individual broadband analysis to help get additional ARPA funding or public service dollars to address. They know what the needs are, right? That's been laid out in the plan. So now it's like, how do we get the funds to actually getting it implemented? So the plan did, while it talked about middle mile, it also very much talked about last mile. And so communities are using those plans to get additional resources in to do the middle mile. So that's the first bucket with BEAD. We're going to be in lockstep with the Public Service Commission. Jaron and Rory are on my speed dial, and we're going to make sure that as communities in New North are seeing opportunities to bring those funds in, that we do help in any way possible. The second one with digital equity, we are part of that team. New North has staff on the digital equity team with the Public Service Commission because, again, we need to make sure we're providing broadband for every citizen, regardless of economic status or if they're in a rural or a more metro part of our region. The third bucket with tribal properties, there are 11 tribal nations in Wisconsin. 7 of those have a footprint in the New North region. So again, we're working with the Public Service Commission on how we get those dollars into tribal properties. The last one is the one that's most confusing to me. And that is the middle mile. That's that recommendation that showed up into our plan. We know there's going to be a significant amount of funding in addition to BEAD, in addition to digital equity, in addition to tribal properties that's specific for middle mile deployment build-outs. And why that hit as a recommendation is, it is true, we have middle mile fiber networks in our New North region. We have communities that are not serviced by middle mile. And we've been approached by public service providers that said, we really think New North, there should be a regional submission, or counties should go together to get this application in by September 30th so we can bring additional monies back into our region. So we're trying to figure that out. Does that make sense? Who are the partners? How do we, in a very short period of time, execute on bringing those additional dollars specific to middle mile into our 18-county region in areas that today are not being serviced by middle mile? And we're told there is a lot of space in New North region that is not today served by middle mile. So I'm going to stop there.
Great. Thank you. Murray, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. It really, Barb, it's a pleasure to be here, and we really appreciate the opportunity to spread the word and be involved and be a partner in this process. I think, I could talk all day on broadband. I would love to connect with anyone in the audience or anyone online. If you want to talk all day about broadband, come reach out to me, please. But I would say, I think, 3 big takeaways from us for today. Number one, please stay energized. The energy in this community is great on broadband, and it's a model for a lot of other parts of the state. But part of that energy is being involved in local planning. We need local leaders to help us figure out what broadband makes sense in your community. What infrastructure investment, where, when, who are we connecting? All of those components, we need your local help. Over the next year, we're doing lots and lots of planning, like August wants. We're doing planning with maps. We're doing planning with outreach, and we want to hear from your communities, and we're going to be working with your communities, both at the state level and also our federal program officer, our liaison here for NTIA and the U.S. Department of Commerce, Kara Cook, is here as well. Kara, you want to raise your hand and wave? Kara's going to be working with you too. We want to hear from you, and we need that local energy if we're going to get this done. And I think number 3, WBO, we have a really open door policy. We want to hear from you. We're here to help you. The gentleman from Wapaka County, I'm sorry I missed your name. Let's connect afterwards. We've got some GIS staff who would love to talk to you about leveraging their data and combining data sets and getting you to that next step and moving forward with your data so that we can get a better map for your county so you can plan better. We would love to hear from you in any way, shape, and form. If you're a consumer of internet, just a regular customer, we have a phone and internet helpline. Please give us a call. Our staff at the Public Service Commission can help you figure out what internet options are available for you and what's coming, what funding is available in your area and what's next. So please, reach out, but also we want to hear from you. We want to help you, but we want to hear from you. So let's keep that conversation going. And I think we're on good footing, so we're looking forward to working further and further. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam?
Good Lord, we covered a lot of ground this morning, didn't we? It feels like a 3-day conference and no one got up for a break. I mean, we covered a lot of ground today, and I know whenever I go to a conference, whether it's the National Association of Counties, Wisconsin Counties Association, what have you, I always try to come back with a few nuggets. And we all learned something today, and we're all here because we care about our communities and we want to make them stronger. And this is such a tremendous opportunity. We all know this, right? So I'm just going to quickly summarize what I heard and respectfully challenge any of my peers at the county level and respectfully challenge any of you, if it isn't going on at the county level, to see if we can raise the bar. First, we all know that every county needs to establish a champion or a driver. That may be the county executive. It may be the county administrator. It may be the county IT director. It may be a grant writer. It may be a coordinator. We heard these suggestions or best practices today. In some cases in Sheboygan County, we have these individuals in place. For example, we hired a grant writer to assist with this, but we don't necessarily have a broadband coordinator. And when we look at this incredible opportunity and all the coordination going forward, that's one of the nuggets I came back with today is we need to strengthen our team locally. The second thing is we heard a lot about talked a lot about establishing a task force and engaging the community. We did that in Sheboygan County. We can further strengthen our team. Our IT director, again, as I mentioned earlier, is playing such a critical role. But engage your Sheboygan County Economic Development Corporation or your Economic Development Corporation. Make sure they're engaged. If they don't have the resources, as someone said up here, well, my county doesn't have an Economic Development Corporation with any resources or staff. Well, then let's do something about that. We should all have a strong economic development corporation and people at the table helping us. Let's strengthen that. Let's get them engaged. The map, to me, that felt so like such good advice and something early on that we felt we needed. Well, what does this look like? How do you communicate with local units of government and constituents if you don't know what's been done, what's in the works, what's being planned? And we really need to establish priorities, lay out that map, and get assistance from our providers to share that information. But what an opportunity to strengthen our ability to communicate and focus. Every county has a planning department, generally has a GIS specialist or a planning person. There's no reason why we can't pull that together and be more effective in sharing that. And then finally, communication. We're all here today. We're all learning. Every time I come to a session like this, I appreciate it because I learn something new, and I think of where I was just a couple years ago with this and how little I knew about this topic. And maybe now I could fill a thimble, but we're all learning. And in engaging your local community, your local leaders, we have what's called heads of local government, where we pull all the top elected local officials together. We break bread, we get together 3-4 times a year, and we talk about areas of interest. The last 2 times we met, we talked about broadband. This is such a key area of importance. We're talking about collaborating. We're talking about leveraging our resources. Towns don't want to borrow millions of dollars, but they might be willing to do something if the school district's at the table and the county's at the table and the state comes forward at the table. And that, again, takes a driver or individuals to coordinate that, as was a key point made today. And then finally, just being transparent and honest with people and boiling it down as much as we possibly can. And I want to compliment many of you today who got up here and I thought really boiled it down in a manner where I think the vast majority of us could get our arms around it. That is so important, that communication and transparency. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Thanks. Mark?
I think we learned several things today. If the grail we seek is a state positioned for success in the future, then access to broadband has moved from the category of, gee, that would be a nice luxury to have, to an absolute necessity. I think we also learned that there is no one path to get us from where we are to where we desire to be. I think we also learned that there is a certain magic to the collaboration and cooperation that is occurring in New North, and that is maybe not necessary, but a highly desirable ingredient to move to a successful place, to get broadband to as many places as possible. And then the last thing that I learned today is that we have a lot of really smart people that care deeply about the future of this state and are willing to do what it takes with whomever it takes to get us from where we are to where we wish to be. And I'm really proud to be part of that group.
Thank you. Well, we have, good Lord, we're actually on time. We have 2.5 minutes left before we're supposed. But I might talk a little longer than 2.5 minutes, so bear with me. It would not be appropriate to end this session without thanking New North and Barb and Barbara. In the 1890s, the rock stars of London were explorers. They were the people who went out and found new places in Africa and South America and all the rest of that. Obviously, this is a complicated world, and people need to go down that path and report back from the inner darkness what they've found down there so that you can get through here. And I think clearly New North has played a hugely important role in doing that. And I congratulate all the other people who have plugged into their efforts and learned from the Governor's Commission or Task Force on Broadband. So I think that's all important. I would put 3 things on the table. The first thing I would say, again, is what Adam mentioned and others have mentioned, the importance of communication. One of the harshest decisions that they made on D-Day was to essentially not use seasoned veterans in the attack staffing, so that 90% of the soldiers from all countries who landed at D-Day had never seen battle before. And the reason they did that was they were not persuaded that seasoned veterans would in fact get into those damn ships or leap out of the planes or crawl up on the beaches or climb up Mount Dahak, okay? We are operating, for better or worse, at a point in time where not all the local officials who are going to decide how to spend money, not all the business leaders who are going to decide to engage or not engage, are up to speed on the conclusion that Mark just put on the table. And to go and spend hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars ultimately, without understanding how all of this stuff plugs in, I think has got to be higher up on the list of things that we need to be paying attention to. The third thing I would say is that I think part of that conversation needs to be their capacity, our capacity to help them understand the concept of sustainability and funding, right? We are not talking about giving money away. We are talking about investing money. We need to do a better job of evaluating what that means to a community when you have broadband. So you track that jobs coming in are there or jobs staying there are there because of the broadband, so that you can put numbers on these things and help people understand. Well, I don't care whether you want to watch Netflix or not, quite honestly, but if you don't have broadband here, you won't be able to have EMTs here. You will not be able to have the level of health care you're looking for. Your kids will not get the same level of education. We need to be consciously making that conversation. My last point would be, ultimately, the difference between decision acceleration and action deceleration is two things. Decision accelerators look at context of the situation. They look at sustainability in terms of where's the money coming from. They look at prioritization. How do you prioritize based on the first 2 points? And then they look at best practices. And you can make decisions based upon that. What we discover, however, is decisions don't always lead to action. And so you have to produce two additional process points. One is due diligence, and the second is transitional management. And we talked about both of those things today. We need to spend more time on it. I don't understand where all the workforce is coming to suddenly coordinate 18 counties with the construction pieces that are out there, given what I know about where we are from a workforce point of view. I think we got to be talking about what that looks like and how you flip the switches on. You have to talk about a variety of these things, or all the rest of this doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen on the timelines that are required, and so on and so forth. So I think all of that's important. Does nobody make a microphone that can pick up a voice more than 5 inches away? Somebody needs to work on that, another conference. Let me end by saying that this is the third of these that we have done in terms of action accelerators. So we did early care and education. We did workforce recruitment, attraction, and retention. We're doing this. We have 5 more of these coming on different topics. None of it happens without people who care about their communities and care about their families and their friends. None of it happens without people who are experts and experienced being willing to share information. And none of this will all go forward in all 8 and 9 of those boxes unless we stay in touch with each other, understand they're all interrelated, and ask ourselves, Steve Schneider and others saying about comprehensive planning. We really do need to get this right, folks. This is a pivotal moment in Wisconsin's history. So thank you for being here, whether you're here in person or online. Thanks to all the folks who've served on the panel. Thanks again to all the New North folks. And thanks to all of you in the audience. Look forward to seeing you again. And we're 3 minutes over. Not bad. Take care, folks.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.
WisconsinEye relies on contributions from you. Your tax-deductible investment in WisEye supports access to unfiltered, beginning-to-end coverage of Campaign 2022 and state capitol proceedings, available to you 24/7. Help us reach our goal of raising $30,000 by making a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321. Thank you for your support.